Chapter 225. Under everyone's astonished gazes, two bands of light once again grew out from Feng Xingjian's back. The two bands of light continued to intertwine and eventually turned into a fourth circle of light. Fifth level breakthrough. Right now, his astral powers had gone through 4 levels of evolution, and the stats window had turned into the words prodigious astral divine powers. However, this was not the end. Feng Xingjian could feel that the information was still gushing into his brain. All sorts of knowledge regarding the astral energies, and the Earth's heaviness exploded in his mind one after another. It was like a waterfall of data pouring down endlessly from a computer screen. Feng Xingjian's brain continued to work rapidly, absorbing all this knowledge like a sponge. The astonishing perseverance, courage, comprehension, and logical abilities bestowed upon him by the world's #1 talent allowed him to absorb the information at an astonishing rate. When he broke through to the 5th level, the old man's eyes widened to the size of light bulbs. Holt felt as if his worldview was going to collapse. How could this be? The most correct way to solve this ancient star chart should be the method I used. This should be a star chart. Why is it that he's able to solve it faster than me? And it's even higher. Anderson, Wei Lung, Manny, Rhoda, and the other students all stared in a daze at the circle of light behind Feng Xingjian. Their minds were completely blank, unable to say a single word. What Feng Xingjian had done was simply too astonishing. Who had ever heard of someone solving 5 levels of the Pantheon Monument in one go? However, in such a state, another circle of light formed at the back of Feng Xingjian's waist. He had broken through to the 6th level. 6 levels? It's really 6 levels? There are really 6 levels to the Pantheon Monument's mysteries? The old man's body trembled intensely. To be able to see the Pantheon Monument's mysteries being solved in his lifetime, he could die without any regrets. What could it be? To be able to contain 6 levels of mysteries. What kind of world-shaking martial arts would the melancholic monarch's core legacy be? Everyone looked at Feng Xingjian with the same expectant gaze. At this moment, there were no longer any feelings of jealousy or envy. What they were most curious about was what skills Feng Xingjian had learned. However, just as they were so astonished that they were almost numb, thinking that it was finally over, Feng Xingjian gritted his teeth and let out a loud bellow. "There's more!" In that instant, it was as if the space had been shaken violently by a violent power. The Pantheon Monument started to sway violently, emitting streams of dazzling white light. What's going? Therefore, under everyone's astonished and almost numb gazes, a 6th light circle grew out from Feng Xingjian's back, and he had broken through to the 7th level. Under everyone's gazes, Feng Xingjian had Then, under everyone's astonished and terrified gazes, a golden figure slowly came out from the Pantheon Monument. The old man who guarded the monument opened his mouth wide and blurted out, "Lord Monarch?" The old man had seen the portrait of the Great Western Regional Academy's founder, the melancholic monarch. The golden figure that had come out from the Pantheon Monument looked exactly like the melancholic monarch. How could he not be astonished? Hearing the old man's words, everyone looked at the golden figure on the Pantheon Monument in astonishment. If this person who had suddenly appeared was really the melancholic monarch, then wouldn't this divine-level expert have lived for over 200 years? Everyone felt their hair stand on end, but the golden melancholic monarch did not seem to mind. He merely looked at Feng Xingjian, who was surrounded by the 6 light circles, smiled, and nodded, his face filled with satisfaction. He then looked toward the other examinees who had comprehended the Pantheon Monument and broke into a smile. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. It was as if he wanted to say something, but was unable to. At the next moment, the golden figure exploded into a myriad of light rays, shooting out toward everyone present. Everyone wanted to dodge, but how could they possibly dodge light speed? They were all struck by the light rays. However, this was not an attack, but a gift. A total of 4 people present, Holt, Anderson, Manny, and Rhoda, were pierced by the light rays. The instant they were hit by the light rays, various illusions immediately appeared in their minds. Their outstanding talent was completely unleashed. This light ray seemed to have the ability to dig out one's talent and potential. In that instant, it gave the four of them a layer of inspiration, the inspiration of heaven's perception. Rhoda clenched her fists in disbelief. She turned her head, feeling as if there were voices in the surroundings that wanted to talk to her. This is the inspiration of heaven's perception? I feel that I'm only a step away from heaven's perception. The same feeling rose up in Holt, Anderson, and Manny's minds. The old man guarding the monument sighed and said, "It seems that this is the last message left behind by the melancholic monarch in the Pantheon Monument. When someone unravels the final profoundness of the Pantheon Monument, this message will appear, helping the few people with the greatest potential to unlock heaven's perception." He threw a glance at the other examinees, but it was clear from his words that he had not fully expressed his thoughts. Clearly, other than Holt, Anderson, Manny, and Rhoda, as well as Wei Lung, who had already attained heaven's perception, the potential of the others did not catch the melancholic monarch's eye. They could not even unlock heaven's perception. Hearing these words, David was infuriated. Why? Why didn't the melancholic monarch choose me? It's one thing for Anderson and Holt. One of them is the shadow death god, while the other is the astral ancestor's grand disciple. But where are the other two? Are they even worthy of being compared to me? However, at the next moment, looking at Feng Xingjian, who was in the middle of the 6 circles of light, David felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over his head, drenching him to the core. To think that Feng Xingjian had comprehended all 7 levels of profoundness and completely solved the Pantheon Monument, this made him feel extremely lost and in despair. The old man who guarded the monument walked up to Feng Xingjian and saw Feng Xingjian slowly descending from the air. The 6 circles of light behind him shattered one by one. The old man looked at Feng Xingjian fervently and said, "What on earth have you comprehended? What kind of technique is it? Is it the melancholic monarch's legacy?" Everyone else turned their gazes over as well. They were clearly very curious about what Feng Xingjian had comprehended. 200 years ago, the melancholic monarch, who had created the empire together with 7 other divine-level experts, the Regional Academy, and the Pantheon Monument. What kind of legacy had he left behind in the Pantheon Monument? Who would not be curious? Who would not be agitated? However, looking at their curious gazes, Feng Xingjian threw a glance at his stats window and said, "Must I say it?" Chapter 226. Hearing Feng Xingjian's words, a hint of helplessness flashed in everyone's eyes. The old man who guarded the monument also exhaled and said, "Of course, you can choose not to." The martial arts comprehended from the Pantheon Monument concern the secrets of the powers of countless knights and confer knights. Of course, he could choose to keep it a secret. However, the old man added, "But you must know that if you're willing to announce the profoundness you've comprehended, the Academy will definitely give you a great compensation." Feng Xingjian blinked and asked, "Is there a level 30 divine remains equipment?" Hearing this, the old man coughed violently and said furiously, "Do you think that divine remains equipment are cabbages? That you can get your hands on them easily? But the melancholic monarch's legacy is not cabbages either. Unless the Academy can bring out a divine remains equipment, I won't be exchanging it." The old man looked at Feng Xingjian with a bitter expression. However, he was clearly not a tyrant like the first prince, who would take whatever he wanted and bully others with his strength. After all, he had once been the governor and the headmaster of the Regional Academy. Of course, he would not bully the younger generation. However, he still tried to persuade Feng Xingjian, "Why do you want a divine remains equipment? That thing can only be used for fighting and killing. Now that the world has been peaceful for a long time, what's the use of it? The Academy can provide you with other things. You must know that in your cultivation after the second transition, other than exchanging information with ether particles, you'll also need to exchange energy with ether particles. Which place in the world has the highest ether particle density? Of course, it's the Sacred Land, which is 1 level higher than Secret Realms. However, the ether particle density in the Sacred Land varies as well. As long as you announce the method and techniques that you've comprehended, I can let you use the Academy's highest grade sacred land for free. The ether particle density there is 100 times that of ordinary spaces. However, how could Feng Xingjian possibly reveal the method he had comprehended the Pantheon monument? As for the specific techniques, after taking a look at the introduction of the prodigious astral divine powers waves, he decided not to reveal them. Unless the other party could give him a divine remains equipment, he would then consider telling them the edited version. However, the old man didn't give up. He kept following Feng Xingjian and kept talking. Feng Xingjian couldn't be bothered with him. He simply sat down and waited for the 12 hours to be over. Most of the other students no longer had the mood to comprehend the Pantheon monument. Even if some of them were to force themselves to do so, their minds were filled with Feng Xingjian's astonishing prowess, as well as the old man's incessant pestering. What will it take for you to tell me? How about this? I'll use my killing technique to exchange for it, all right? Or, I still have a level 29 superior divine weapon. How about I exchange it with you for the secret on it? How about this? I'll take you in as my disciple. I'm the governor from 2 batches ago. I'll impart all of my experiences to you and let you be my last disciple. Feng Xingjian didn't say anything, but the people around him couldn't help but look at the old man. The old man frowned. What's wrong? Manny could not help but say, this person has even rejected the divine level expert, the holy Orison, to take him in as a disciple. Do you think that you'll be able to move him? What? You rejected that old fogey, Raoul? This old man's seniority was clearly very high. To think that even the holy Orison had become an old fogey in his mouth. So what if I rejected him? Although he's a divine level expert, 1 level higher than me, that's because I've spent too much time trying to solve the mysteries of the Pantheon monument. My killing techniques and specialties are definitely more powerful than his. With your aptitude, if you were to learn them, you'd definitely be #1 in the world in the future. That Mage King, the Pope, and the others wouldn't be a match for you. The others shook their heads. Rhoda and the others continued to comprehend the Pantheon monument with the inspiration from their heaven's perception. With the help of the melancholic monarch, they had unlocked their innate potential and instantly felt that their minds were much clearer than before. Various inspirations kept flashing in their minds with each and every move they made. In the process of comprehending the Pantheon monument, Rhoda's body also lit up with many light spots. She had broken through to the 1st level. The others also calmed down and continued to comprehend the Pantheon monument. David was the only one who was still unable to calm down. It was because the news of Feng Xingjian's breakthrough to the 7th level was too shocking. His mind was like boiling water, boiling and churning incessantly. He was unable to calm down and think about the Pantheon monument. On the other side, Feng Xingjian could not be bothered to listen to the old man's words. He looked at the new skill that had appeared on his stats window, prodigious astral divine powers waves. This skill was very interesting, or rather, very special. It was an ultimate technique that the melancholic monarch had unintentionally created. The power of the stars, the world reigned supreme. It referred to the strongest power in this world, the power to move the celestial bodies. Disregarding other aspects, and just based on the absolute value, the power to move the stars was indeed the strongest power in this world. With sufficient gravity, one could move the Earth, the moon, push the sun, create neutron stars, black holes, and even distort space-time. The prodigious astral divine powers waves that Feng Xingjian had cultivated was the ultimate technique that the melancholic monarch was most proud of. With the reinforcement from the powers of the stars, he could greatly increase his powers. However, there were no stars in Miracle World. Therefore, the melancholic monarch borrowed the powers from the earth under his feet. In his understanding, the earth under his feet was also an extremely huge star, and the power he borrowed was naturally gravity. However, it was not a killing technique, nor was it a pure martial technique. The prodigious astral divine powers waves. Just from the name alone, one could tell that it was a type of waves that cultivated the physical body through gravity. Everything in the world would be affected by gravity, and the human body would constantly be affected by it. Moreover, the people in Miracle World still believe that gravity was a manifestation of ether particles. Therefore, the prodigious astral divine powers waves adjusted gravity through ether particles, causing the gravitational forces acting on one's body to circulate continuously for 24 hours a day. The prodigious astral divine powers waves could make use of gravity to greatly increase one's powers. It was equivalent to solidifying a large amount of gravity within one's body, and each and every one of his movements would have the power to overturn rivers and seas. It could also instantly and explosively strengthen and control the gravitational forces around him during battle. As the strongest force in the universe, the prodigious astral divine powers waves, which have been cultivated to the highest realm, could easily tear apart mountains, seas, and even distort space-time. However, right now, this waves was flashing, as if it would disappear at any moment. It was because Feng Xingjian already had the Sonito Sword Zephyr waves. Now that he had obtained the waves cultivation method for the prodigious astral divine powers waves, if he did not switch to it, the prodigious astral divine powers waves would gradually disappear. It was because each person could only circulate one type of waves. Of course, Feng Xingjian would cultivate the prodigious astral divine powers waves. The vital energy, blood, and muscles in his body started to circulate incessantly. The original Sonito Sword Zephyr waves gradually stopped, and the prodigious astral divine powers waves started to circulate. The replacement of waves had started. Chapter 227. In the hall, unbeknownst to everyone else, Feng Xingjian had started to modify his waves. He followed the method of the prodigious astral divine powers barrier, using ether particles to guide the gravity under his feet and slowly building up his waves. Before the final 12 hours were up, Feng Xingjian had finally completed the prodigious astral divine powers waves. And after the level 7 waves had been transformed into the prodigious astral divine powers waves, it had also become level 1. The prodigious astral divine powers waves increased by 10 points in strength, 3 points in agility, 3 points in reaction, 3 points in endurance, and 3 points in flexibility. In terms of attributes, the prodigious astral divine power used gravity to strengthen itself, far surpassing the speed of the sonic sword breath. Furthermore, he did not only possess a high attribute bonus. After cultivating the prodigious astral divine power, he could control his own gravitational force and balance it out. In other words, he could fly. However, the level 1 prodigious astral divine power could only allow him to float. If he wanted to fly, he would need to be at least level 5. What was even more amazing was that the prodigious astral divine powers could perform terra ingurgitation once every hour, allowing him to absorb the gravitational pull from the matter within a range of several kilometers and add all of it to his physical body, crazily increasing his powers. This meant that if a house weighed 1,000,000 tons, then after absorbing its gravity, Feng Xingjian would be able to punch out with a force of 1,000,000 tons. Level 1 prodigious astral divine power would be able to absorb and unleash the gravitational force within a radius of 1 kilometer. Level 2 prodigious astral divine power would be able to cover a radius of 2 kilometers. Level 10 prodigious astral divine power would be able to cover a radius of 10 kilometers. The gravitational force within a 10-kilometer radius was absorbed, which meant that the area within a 10-kilometer radius had become a gravity-free environment. This gravitational force that had disappeared could be directly used by Feng Xingjian. It was as if each of his punches and kicks were truly like mountains and seas crashing down. How terrifying was this? The extremely high attribute increment, the ability to adjust gravity, and the ability to use terra ingurgitation every hour. These were the powerful aspects of the prodigious astral divine powers waves. As expected of the melancholic monarch's greatest legacy and fundamental martial technique, just the ripples alone were already so powerful. Fang Xingjian wondered how powerful the melancholic monarch's killing technique would be if he were to unleash it at full power. However, Fang Xingjian had relied on heaven's perception and the information from the Pantheon Monument in order to cultivate the prodigious astral divine powers. This wave's technique required the use of ether particles to control gravity. In fact, it was a waves that only second transition knights could cultivate. Hence, Fang Xingjian's current limit was already at level 1. If he wanted to upgrade his prodigious astral divine power, he would have to wait until he had completed his second job transition. It was because only at the second transition would one be able to use ether particles to activate the great powers of the heavens and earth. Only then would martial techniques become martial arts. Therefore, after the 12 hours of observing the Pantheon Monument observation had passed, Fang Xingjian had converted the waves into the prodigious astral divine power. Name: Fang Xingjian. Age: 17. Class: Wind Shadow, Sword Divinity level. Level 19, Strength 73 plus 5 Agility, 182 plus 5 Reaction, 77 Endurance, 47 Flexibility, 49 Ether Synchronization Rate. 10%. The attributes above come into effect once the prodigious astral divine powers waves is activated. Due to perfect muscles, plus 5 in strength attribute. Techniques: Rebirth Sword Technique, New 9-Headed Dragon Sword Technique, Luminous Heaven Soaring Slash, Ether Sword Ripples, Level 3 Ether Divine Art Specialties, Genius Swordsmanship, Elementary Survival Instinct, Internal Healing, Internal Training, Sword Specialist, Heightened Reflexes, Perfect Muscles, Elementary Berserkness, Unparalleled Sword Intent. Apex Waves. Level 1 Prodigious Astral Divine Powers Waves Mental Cultivation Method. Level 5 Universal Sword Dominance Lunisolar Other Than. Strength. His other attributes had been reduced by 1 level due to the recultivation of his waves. However, this was only temporary. As long as his prodigious astral divine powers reached level 3, he would be able to surpass the original Sonido Sword Zephyr in all aspects. Thereafter, the difference between the two would only get greater and greater. After the 12 hours were up, Fang Xingjian looked up and discovered that the number of people who had attained a breakthrough had increased once again. Holt had already attained a breakthrough to the 5th level of the Pantheon Monument. However, his eyes were locked tightly as he felt that there was a huge barrier before him, preventing him from breaking through. Why? Why do I feel that the inscriptions on the Pantheon Monument seem to be lacking something? What on earth is it lacking? Why can't I continue with my comprehension? Anderson's countenance was extremely grim. Although he had attained a breakthrough to the 3rd level of the Pantheon Monument and was already a great talent, he was still a far cry from Holt's 5th level, let alone Fang Xingjian's 7th level. Moreover, other than him, Wei Lung had also attained a breakthrough to the 3rd level. Rhoda's face revealed a satisfied expression. Like Manny, she had also attained a breakthrough to the 2nd level. Manny, on the other hand, did not dwell on the Pantheon Monument. Instead, he paid more attention to the hint of inspiration regarding heaven's perception that the melancholic monarch had given him. Anyway, by the looks of it, having attained 2 levels of the Pantheon Monument would be sufficient for him to enter the top 16 and participate in the next round of arena battles. Right now, compared to the Pantheon Monument, he was more concerned about when he would be able to attain heaven's perception. David's countenance was ashen as he hid at the back of the crowd, as if he did not dare to look into Fang Xingjian's eyes. After going through 3 battles, Fang Xingjian's performance had become increasingly terrifying. David had completely extinguished all thoughts of competing against Fang Xingjian and only wanted to stay far away from Fang Xingjian. He no longer dared to go against Fang Xingjian. However, after experiencing such a blow, being humiliated, treated as a joke, and having his ambitions completely extinguished by Fang Xingjian, it was likely that he would not be able to make any more improvements in his life. Just as everyone was about to head out, the old man who guarded the monument blocked Fang Xingjian's path and said, "Hey, you're really not going to consider becoming my disciple? I've taught countless disciples in my life. and many of them have become top-notch experts in the world. You definitely won't lose out if you become my disciple. Not only will you be able to learn and look at all the killing techniques in the academy, I'll even provide you with various heavenly and earthly treasures and ferocious beasts. Won't you consider it? It was already nighttime outside the hall, but there were still several hundred spectators waiting here. In front of them were the 4 examiners. Governor Devitt smiled and said, "What do you guys think the results of the Pantheon Monument observation this time around will be like? There are too many geniuses in this batch. Naturally, the results will far surpass those of the previous batches," the old man Luke said. "But if we're talking about the first place, it should still be Holt or Fong Xingjian, right?" Yari said, "There's also Anderson. Don't forget about him just because of Holt's and Fong Xingjian's outstanding performances. For him to be able to transition into the Shadow Death God, which no one has succeeded in the past 200 years, he definitely has something extraordinary about him. His talent is definitely not inferior to Holt's or Fong Xingjian's. It's just that his accumulation is not as strong as theirs. And this stage is a test of one's talent. He still has a lot of hope." Armstrong, whose face was filled with scars, said, "There's also Wei Lung. Don't forget about him. Compared to the other 3, his accumulation is really lacking. But even so, he was able to attain heaven's perception. This shows his talent. Moreover, he's carrying a blood feud with him. He's suppressed to the extreme, but the stronger the suppression, the stronger the rebound. Once he explodes, the earth will tremble and the mountains will shake. He might even soar up into the sky." Amongst the crowd, there are also people discussing the rankings for this stage. "I think highly of Fong Xingjian. His performance in the previous 2 stages was too outstanding. His abilities are on a different level from the other knights. So what if he's strong?" This stage of Pantheon Monument observation tests the cultivator's talent. Although Fong Xingjian is strong now, it doesn't mean that his talent is the best. In terms of talent, Anderson is still better. At the very least, there have been people who have succeeded in transitioning into a windstorm sword hero, but no one has succeeded in becoming a shadow death god in the past 200 years. His talent is probably above Fong Xingjian's. It's useless to just have talent. I think highly of Holt. The legacy of a divine-level expert is definitely not to be underestimated. His accumulation is definitely the strongest amongst a few of them. I know that other than talent, what's most important in deciphering the Pantheon Monument is a strong foundation. Moreover, in terms of talent, Holt has the legacy of a divine-level expert. How can his talent be weak? Just as everyone was discussing, and exchanging their opinions, the door to the hall opened. Chapter 228. Seeing that the door had been opened, Devitt smiled and said, "All right, according to the rules, you guys can come out according to the number of levels you have comprehended from the highest to the lowest. After you come out, show us what you've comprehended." The reason for judging from the highest to the lowest was naturally so that the examiners could compare and judge the students' comprehensions more directly. In the hall, everyone's gazes turned toward Fong Xingjian. Logically speaking, he should be the first to go out. However, the old man waved his hand and said, "It's fine. You guys can go out first. I'll have a chat with this little brother." He looked at Fong Xingjian with a burning gaze and said, "Are you really not going to reconsider? Listen to me. I have a killing technique that allows one to transform into 4 people, easily increasing one's battle prowess by 4 times. Holt and the others smiled helplessly. In the end, Holt was still the first to walk out. In everyone's eyes, the fact that Holt was the first to walk out naturally meant that he was the person who had comprehended the highest level. Everyone's eyes also flashed with a hint of this is only natural. There was no need to doubt the aptitude of a divine-level disciple. Devitt also smiled and looked at Holt in anticipation, saying, "Good, Holt, you really didn't disappoint me. Quickly show us how many levels you've comprehended." Holt's expression was a little strange, but he did not say anything. He merely nodded and thought for a while. In the next moment, light spots flashed all over his body, and 4 circles of light rose up behind him. As layers of halos rose from his back, everyone's expressions changed from surprise to shock, and finally, shock. For circles of light? Doesn't that mean that he has comprehended 5 levels of the Pantheon Monument? He has comprehended 5 levels of the Pantheon Monument? My God, the latest record is only Governor Devitt's 4 levels, right? To think that he has reached the 5th level, Holt really lives up to his name as someone favored by the heavens. Amazing. He's really too amazing. An uproar broke out among the spectators. Seeing this scene, a hint of joy flashed past Devitt's face. He smiled and said, "Good, good, good. The heavens are really blessing me, Sincoda. To think that after I've broken through to the 4th level, there's still someone who can break through to the 5th level of the Pantheon Monument's profoundness, breaking the record once again." He looked at Holt with a face full of praise and said, "Holt, you really didn't disappoint me. You're so talented that it makes people slap the table in admiration. Among the heroes in the world today, you're already a first-rate character. How is it? Is the 5th layer the last layer?" With that, he looked at Holt with curiosity and excitement. The 3 examiners at the side nodded repeatedly when they heard this, and they looked at Holt with expressions of admiration as if they were looking at a peerless piece of unpolished jade. They wished for nothing more than to take Holt in their hands and carefully carve him so that he could shine brilliantly in the future. They had thought that with so many geniuses provoking and competing against each other, there might be someone who would be able to achieve a breakthrough under the pressure. However, they had felt that it would already be very amazing if they could reach the 4th level, which Governor Devitt had achieved previously. They had not expected that someone would be able to reach the 5th level. This was simply a miracle. However, at the thought that Feng Xingjian was the astral ancestor's grand disciple, they shook their heads in pity. It's a pity. If only he didn't have a master. Hearing that, Holt thought of Feng Xingjian, who had yet to come out. However, he smiled bitterly and shook his head, saying, "Lord Devitt, you're too kind. However, I'm still not satisfied after reaching the 5th level. I'm also not up to it. Sigh, you deserve all these praises." Devitt thought that Feng Xingjian was still being humble, so he waved his hand and said, "It's already very rare for you to be able to comprehend the 5th level. It'll probably be a very, very long time before anyone can surpass you. It's true that you deserve to be the first in this stage." Holt's expression was awkward. However, he did not say anything on the spot and merely smiled bitterly, shaking his head. A large group of young ladies among the spectators cheered, and streams of scorching rays seemed as if they wanted to roast Holt. Young Master Holt is really the best. Of course. Otherwise, how could he have been taken in as a disciple of a divine-level expert? His talent is definitely the best in this batch. The 5th level. This has surpassed the record that Lord Devitt broke back then. It's a new record. Moreover, how old was Lord Devitt back then? He was almost 40 years old. How old is Holt? These young ladies were all aristocratic ladies who admired Holt. Right now, they were cheering as if there was no one else around them, immediately causing the others around them to feel displeased. However, they did not care at all. It was as if they only had eyes for Holt, and they did not notice that Holt's expression was slightly awkward. Devitt frowned, but he still continued to ask, "Since you've already comprehended the 5th level, then let me ask you, Holt, are you willing to tell us the method to resolve it? We'll use something of equal value to exchange it with you." Holt had long since thought of a way to deal with this. He shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, but this method concerns my teacher's and grandmaster's martial arts secrets. Forgive me for not being able to say it." Right now, the many spectators outside the hall were looking at the 4 circles of light behind Holt, their faces filled with astonishment and envy. Treja's Xiao sighed and said, "To think that he has comprehended the 5th level of the Pantheon Monument's mysteries. To be able to be taken in as a disciple by a divine-level expert, Holt is truly a prodigy. This has become the highest record in the past 200 years. His junior, Zhou Yong, also nodded and said, "It seems that Holt has gained the most from the Pantheon Monument this time around. To be able to comprehend the 5th level of the Pantheon Monument. To be able to comprehend the 5th level of the Pantheon Monument's mysteries. To what extent has his talent reached? Cursed City Lord also sighed and shook his head. Amazing, really amazing. Back then, I was only able to comprehend the second level of the Pantheon Monument's mysteries and was already known as a genius. Compared to Holt, the difference is like the difference between clouds and mud. I wonder how many levels Xinjiang will be able to comprehend. With his talent, it shouldn't be a problem for him to reach the third level. It's just that I wonder if he'll be able to attain a breakthrough to the fourth level. It's a pity. If Xinjiang also had the legacy of a divine level expert, he'd probably be able to catch up to Holt. Just as he said this, the golden-haired aristocratic lady turned and looked at Cursed City Lord unhappily, saying, "Aren't you thinking too highly of Feng Xinjiang? How can he be compared to our Holt?" Saying that, she looked at Holt lovingly and said, "Holt is the grand disciple of a divine level expert. He's of noble birth and has a strong background. His talent is 10 streets higher than Feng Xinjiang's. Well, why do you have to compare our Holt with Feng Xinjiang? Do you know how hardworking Holt is? Do you know how hard it is for him?" Cursed City Lord frowned and said, "You're Holt's relative? How could I possibly be young Master Holt's relative?" That young lady said, "I'll be satisfied as long as he can take a look at me later." Lilia immediately turned and glared at the golden-haired aristocratic lady. However, Cursed City Lord stopped her and shook his head. He could not be bothered with that aristocratic lady. He knew that it would be useless no matter what he said to a brainless fan like her. When the others heard Holt say that he had used the astral ancestor's legacy to solve the fifth level of the Pantheon Monument's mysteries, a hint of understanding flashed in their hearts. Chapter 229. A deity-level technique was used to counter another deity-level technique. No wonder Holt could reach the fifth level. This time, Holt is number 1. After all, he has a deep foundation. At the front, hearing Holt's words, a hint of pity flashed on Devitt's face. Since this concerns the profoundness of the astral ancestor, it's naturally not something that we can pry into. He turned to look at the door and asked, "Who's next?" Anderson slowly walked out from the door. Seeing the look of anticipation on Governor Devitt's face, Anderson's lips twitched and he casually walked up to him, releasing 2 layers of light. With Holt's previous provocation, the crowd was much calmer toward Andre's performance, but they were still full of envy and jealousy. Devitt nodded in satisfaction. Although Anderson's results were slightly inferior to Holt's, Holt was a divine-level expert's grand disciple. It was understandable that Anderson's results were slightly worse than Holt's, but this was still a very impressive result. Good. You've comprehended the third level of the mystery. This result is something that no one has achieved in the past 10 years. This is really good. The golden-haired young lady next to Lilia sneered and said, "It seems that Feng Xinjiang can't even be compared to Anderson, yet he still wants to compete with our Holt. He really doesn't know his place." Lilia's face was flushed with anger, but she could not refute the facts in front of her. After Andre got off the stage, Wei Lung walked up again. One halo flashed, followed by another, showing that he had broken through to the third level of the profoundness. "Ha ha!" Devitt laughed out loud and said, "Our great Western region has a successor. It's true that this batch of students is filled with resplendent stars, shining brilliantly on each other. However, since both you and Anderson have attained a breakthrough to the third level of the mysteries, you'll be tied for second place. After all, the results of this stage would not affect the final rankings of the regional selection. The final 10 rankings of the regional selection would be decided through the arena battles. Therefore, no one had any objections. Next should be Feng Xinjiang, right? Didn't you hear? They were told to come out according to the level they were on. The later they came out, the lower the level they were on. Trija Clan Xiao stood amidst the crowd, looking in the direction of the gate in amusement. Humph, Windstorm Sword Hero. Even after attaining Heaven's perception, I still can't compare to the other 3. Just as he was halfway through his sentence, Manny strolled out from the door, displaying 2 halos. Devitt praised Manny, but he couldn't help but frown. It was a very simple logic. Since Manny had come out before Feng Xinjiang, did that not mean that Feng Xinjiang whom many of them thought highly of, was not only inferior to Holt, Anderson, and Wei Lung, but was even inferior to Manny. Following that, Rhoda and the others also came out one by one to receive Devitt's commendation. Seeing that so many people had comprehended the martial arts on the Pantheon monument, Devitt smiled brilliantly. However, he could not help but sigh inwardly. This was because even those who had mastered the first level of the profound mystery had come out, but Feng Xingjian had yet to come out. Didn't that mean that Feng Xingjian was below them? Finally, another knight walked out from the door. It was an examinee who had not even comprehended the first level of the profound mystery. Under the gazes of the 4 examiners, he started to explain his method of resolving the mystery and the things he had thought of, hoping that the examiners would evaluate him. Devitt shook his head and said to them, "There's no need for you to be discouraged. In the previous batches, many knights had not been able to comprehend the first level of the profound mystery. You just need to tell us about your method of resolving the mystery and what you have gained. We'll judge and give you marks." With that, the spectators finally could not help but start whispering amongst themselves. To think that Feng Xingjian hasn't even comprehended the first level of the profound mystery. That's impossible, right? With his talent at attaining heaven's perception, it shouldn't be possible. What's impossible about it? Didn't you hear the governor's instructions? The examinees will come out in descending order according to the number of levels they have comprehended. Feng Xingjian has yet to come out, meaning that he hasn't even comprehended the first level. I think he's too embarrassed to come out. That might really be the case. After all, in history, there has never been a blind person who came to the 3rd stage. Perhaps without sight, he really wouldn't be able to receive part of the information on the Pantheon monument. That's why I say that a blind person will always be a blind person. No matter how strong his battle prowess or how talented he is, he might just be eliminated in this stage. At the back of the crowd, Trija Clan Xiao, he laughed out loud. As he laughed, he suddenly held onto his stomach and waved his hand at Zhou Yong. "This is really funny. This is really too funny. Feng Xingjian, to think that we've placed so much importance on you. In the end, he himself might just be eliminated." Xiao could not help but laugh as he waved his hand at Zhou Yong. "We've really been worried for nothing. This guy's just a joke." Zhou Yong could not help but shake his head as well, as if he had not expected that things would end up in such a farce. Feng Xingjian had not even comprehended the first level of the profound mystery. On the other side, the golden-haired aristocratic young lady threw a mocking glance at Lilia and started giggling. Some people insist on joining the group of geniuses, but in the end, the Pantheon monument will be able to test out who is the real deal. I said that his heaven's perception might be an exaggeration. When Lilia, Ferdinand, and the others heard the young lady's words, they all felt extremely aggrieved. However, they could not think of anything to refute her. At the same time, they were extremely unwilling to believe that Feng Xingjian could not even comprehend the first level of the profound mystery. They could not help but worry that something might have happened to Feng Xingjian inside. After Devitt and the other examiners commented on a few more nights, Feng Xingjian finally shook off the old man guarding the monument and walked out slowly. Seeing that Feng Xingjian had finally walked out, many of the spectators laughed, looking as if they were waiting to see a joke. To think that a genius would not be able to match up to other knights. Many of the spectators loved to add insult to injury. Examiner Luke, whose face was filled with wrinkles, also shook his head. However, he still had some suspicions as to whether there was some mistake. He asked, "Feng Xingjian, why are you ranked so far behind? Did something go wrong? Forget it. Have you reached the 4th level?" Holt had only managed to reach the 5th level because he had inherited a divine level legacy. Of course, he did not expect Feng Xingjian to be able to do so. Seeing Feng Xingjian shake his head, Luke could not hide the disappointment in his eyes as he continued to ask, "Then is it the 3rd level?" Feng Xingjian continued to shake his head. The spectators could not help but start booing. However, Feng Xingjian seemed to be able to tell what everyone was thinking. However, he knew that there was nothing much to explain. If he were to show it, everyone would naturally shut up. Therefore, he walked up to the center and said calmly, Let me demonstrate. Under the crowd's amused, pitiful, and mocking gazes, spots of light started to flash on Feng Xingjian's body. Chapter 230. Feng Xingjian did not reply. Instead, he thought about the many star charts and the trajectories on them, and many spots of light started to shine all over his body. Then the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth circles of light lit up one by one. When the third circle of light lit up, everyone was once again dumbfounded. When the fourth, fifth, and even sixth circles of light lit up, the entire place fell silent. It was as if everyone had become mute in that instant. Lilia was the first to react. She smiled and rolled her eyes at the petrified, golden-haired aristocratic young lady, saying, "Ha! What level has Holt comprehended? I think it's the 5th level?" The young lady's countenance instantly darkened, but this time around, she was unable to say anything in rebuttal. She could only clench her teeth, feeling an extreme tightness in her chest. To think that Feng Xingjian had comprehended all 7 levels of the Pantheon Monument's mysteries. This news was too unbelievable and shocking. If someone had told Governor Devitt this before, he would definitely have scoffed and would not have believed it. However, now that the truth was right before his eyes, he had no choice but to believe it. He even saw the old man walking out together with Feng Xingjian. He asked in astonishment, "Why have you come out as well?" The old man grinned, revealing his incomplete set of yellow teeth, and said, "I'm not going to protect the Pantheon Monument anymore. You can find someone else to do it." He turned and looked at Feng Xingjian passionately, saying, "I have fate with this lad. I want to have a good talk with him." Devitt did not continue to bother with the old man, but looked excitedly at Feng Xingjian and asked, "Xingjian, you've solved the Pantheon Monument?" Looking at the 6 circles of light behind Feng Xingjian, Devitt still found it hard to believe. The old man grinned and said, "Xiaoda, you don't believe it either, right? But this lad has really solved the last level of the Pantheon Monument's mysteries. Even a melancholic monarch's spirit has appeared for the 7th level." What? In an instant, all 4 examiners dashed up, looking at Feng Xingjian as if they were looking at a national treasure. Their gazes were so passionate that it seemed as if they could pierce through his body. Devitt grabbed Feng Xingjian fiercely and asked, "Xingjian, have you really solved the Pantheon Monument? You've comprehended the 7th level? Then you must have obtained the fundamental inheritance of the melancholic monarch. What is it? Killing technique? Nurturing path? Or were they ripples? Mental cultivation method?" Although Devitt was a little agitated, he had already calmed down after saying that. In fact, if it was something else, even if he had obtained a divine remains equipment, he would not be so excited. However, the melancholic monarch's most fundamental and core legacy. How astonishing was this? Even amongst the many divine-level experts from 200 years ago, the melancholic monarch's powers were second to none. Devitt looked at Feng Xingjian as if he was looking at a treasure. However, after saying that, he regained his composure. He looked at Feng Xingjian and said, "Xingjian, you don't have to be in such a hurry to tell us. The academy and the regional selection both have rules. The knight's cultivation techniques and martial arts can all be kept a secret, and there's no need for you to tell us everything. It's the same for what you've comprehended from the Pantheon Monument. However, if you're willing to announce it, we won't take it for free. Any knight who announces the profoundness of the Pantheon Monument will receive generous compensation. However, you don't have to be in a hurry to make a decision. You'll be staying in the academy in the future anyway, so you can take your time to consider this." What Devitt was thinking was that after Feng Xingjian became a conferred knight, he would continue his studies in the regional academy. Knights who studied in the regional academy would usually choose to cultivate until they reached a bottleneck. They would then have 2 choices. One was to continue staying in the academy and continue to pursue their studies, pursuing the profoundness of ether particles. This was the path of cultivation and research. The second choice was to leave the academy after feeling that they had reached a bottleneck. The Empire would then arrange a very good position for them outside, be it in the Ministry of Finance, the military, the Royal Armory, the Royal Knight Association, the headmaster of a local academy, the city lord, or the marshal of the troops under the command of the Forbidden Army. All of these were extremely lucrative positions. Of course, after leaving the regional academy, they would not be able to return to continue their studies. Unless they passed the national selection, they would then be able to continue their cultivation in the Empire's National Academy in the imperial capital. No matter how outstanding Feng Xingjian was, no matter how difficult the 10 heavenly barriers for a conferred knight were, Devitt thought that no matter how fast he would still have to stay in the academy for a few years. Naturally, he would have the time to use sugar-coated bullets to get the secrets of the Pantheon Monument out. The spectators at the back were all stunned. 7 levels of profoundness, deciphering the Pantheon Monument. What kind of concept was this? This was something that no one had been able to do in the past 200 years, but now it had been done by a 17-year-old young man. The 4 examiners, who had always been extremely solemn, were now surrounding Feng Xingjian. Their expressions and actions were as if they were looking at their own child. Amongst the crowd, Trija Clan's Xiao Yi frowned, his eyes filled with terror. Impossible, impossible. No one has been able to decipher the final profoundness of the Pantheon Monument in the past 200 years. How could Feng Xingjian have done it? Did I hear wrongly? My eyes must be playing tricks on me. However, the 6 circles of light behind Feng Xingjian's back were still lingering in his mind. He felt that this was the first time in his life that he had felt so surreal, as if he was witnessing a legend. Under everyone's extremely astonished gazes, Devitt and the other 3 returned to their original positions. They had communicated with the old man guarding the monument and were now aware of Feng Xingjian's situation. Devitt's face was glowing, as if he was very satisfied with the results this year. He smiled and said, "The effects of the Pantheon Monument observation in this year's regional selection have far surpassed those in the past. A total of 13 participants have deciphered the profoundness of the Pantheon Monument. 3 of them have attained a breakthrough to the 2nd level. 2 have attained a breakthrough to the 3rd level, and 1 has attained a breakthrough to the 5th level." He then officially announced the most shocking piece of news. "But what I'm most happy about is that our Great Western Region Regional Academy's Pantheon Monument has finally been completely deciphered by someone. The 7th level of the Pantheon Monument observation has been unraveled, achieving a feat that no one has ever accomplished before. Feng Xingjian has deciphered the 7th level of the Pantheon Monument's mysteries and comprehended the melancholic monarch's greatest legacy. Therefore, I announce that the person in first place for this stage of Pantheon Monument observation is Feng Xingjian." In that instant, everyone started applauding. Lilia, Ferdinand, Anthony, and Robert all clapped their hands crazily, to the point that their hands turned red. Xiao Yi and Zhou Yong looked at this scene in disbelief, feeling as if they were still in a dream. Those young ladies who had been cheering for Holt earlier were now all silent, as if someone had grabbed their throats. The subsequent rankings were based on the number of levels of the profoundness comprehended. If the number of levels was the same, then it would depend on the time taken to comprehend it. If the time taken was also the same, then it would depend on the prowess of the martial arts they had comprehended. Of course, the 3rd stage would only select the top 16. Other than the 12 participants who had comprehended the profoundness of the Pantheon Monument, the remaining participants who had yet to comprehend the Pantheon Monument would have to explain their own understanding and demonstrate the martial arts they had comprehended. Then, they would be selected based on their progress. Amongst them, there were some who were just there to make up the numbers, some who were spouting nonsense, and there were also some who had spoken with substance and were not too far away from comprehending the profoundness. Of course, there were people who were judging them, but not many people were paying attention to them. Everyone's attention was focused on Feng Xingjian. Right now, he was the only main character. When the last 16 contestants were chosen, everyone cheered. They were Feng Xingjian in first place, Holt in second place, Wei Lung in third place, Anderson in fourth place. As for David, he had been eliminated with a dejected look on his face. After the rankings were done, the 16 participants were brought to the canteen for a meal. After the meal, as they were all geniuses who were only one step away from becoming conferred knights, they would be talked to by the examiners and then prepared for the final stage, the arena battle. Although this ranking would not affect the results of the arena battle, it would affect Cursed Bet. At the very least, on this night, Ferdinand, who had bet on Feng Xingjian being able to come in first place in the third stage, was smiling even as he slept. Chapter 231. On the night before the regional selections arena battle, a total of 16 examinees would be held for a chat by the examiners. After all, 10 of them would become conferred knights in the future. Even if the other 6 failed this time around, there was a high chance that they would succeed the next time around. These 16 people were likely to become pillars of the country in the future. Of course, the examiners would need to interview them properly to ascertain their temperaments, thoughts, and character. Of course, it was hard to say how much could be gleaned from such a chat. However, it was impossible to not do it just because the effects were limited. It was just like how even civil servants in a modern world had to go through interviews. Before one became a conferred knight, one would also need to be held for a chat by the examiners. As the person who had obtained first place in 3 consecutive stages, Feng Xingjian was naturally the first to enter. The moment he entered, he saw 4 examiners sitting quietly behind a long table. A chair was placed before Feng Xingjian, just like an interview in modern society. Seeing that Feng Xingjian had sat down, Governor Devitt smiled and said, "Don't be nervous. We're just having a casual chat. Today's conversation won't be recorded, and it won't affect your results in the regional selection. So, please feel free to speak." Seeing that Feng Xingjian had nodded, Yaris asked with interest, "Then I'll go first. Xingjian, to be honest, with your great talent, you have a high chance of attaining the divine level. Therefore, I'd like to know what your future goals. Pursue the profoundness of ether particles, govern the country, and ensure that the country is prosperous and peaceful. Let an army and expand our territory, or become a grandmaster and have students all over the world? Or do you have other goals?" Hearing that, Feng Xingjian was stunned for a moment. He had not expected that the other party would ask this question. However, he only gave it some thought before saying, "I don't have much of a desire for revenge. In the past, the only thing I wanted to do was to devote my entire life to pursuing the highest realm in sword arts. However, I later found out that in order to pursue the highest realm in sword arts, not only do I need to do it myself, I also need to create an environment where I can pursue it in peace." Saying this, he paused for a moment as he thought of Li Shuanghua, Catherine, and the first prince. The killing intent in his eyes surged. "Therefore, on the path of seeking the Tao, those who obstruct me in my pursuit of the Tao, those who disturb my thoughts, I will kill them all." The 4 examiners looked at each other, their eyes filled with as expected. Of course, they had already investigated Feng Xingjian's information. They also had a good understanding of Feng Xingjian's situation. He was the kind of existence that would only focus on cultivating if you didn't take the initiative to appear in front of him and disturb him. As long as such a person was given enough space and resources, he would be much easier to control than those knights who wanted to reform the country, expand their territories, and revitalize their clans. Moreover, with their boldness, how could they not tolerate Feng Xingjian's little rashness? Killing some evildoers that annoyed people was not a big deal. Feng Xingjian also knew that the other party must have investigated the information, and he himself disdained to lie about such matters. If he did not even dare to state his own intentions, how could he continue to advance on the path of a knight? Of course, it was impossible for the details to be confirmed through this conversation between the 4 of them. They would have to slowly understand the details in the days to come. The aged Luke said in a trembling voice, "What do you think about the knights being able to deal with commoners as they wish, the government being unable to deal with knights, and only the association being able to supervise knights?" Feng Xingjian's eyes narrowed slightly. After thinking about it, he understood the meaning of this question. Governor Devitt was the second prince's man, and the 4 examiners here were all from the governor's faction. Naturally, they were also the second prince's men. If the first prince was said to represent the empire's traditional influences, then the second prince was said to represent the reformist faction. He wanted to break the tradition of the first wife's son inheriting the throne, changing the strict system of those in power, oppressing those in lower positions. This question clearly had a deeper meaning. He was asking about Feng Xingjian's political leanings. Feng Xingjian naturally had no problem answering this question. There was no longer any possibility for him and the first prince to resolve the conflict, and his thoughts were closer to the second prince's faction to begin with. Therefore, he answered directly, "This is the source of the chaos. The commoners are the empire's foundation. Every year, a large number of knights are born from the commoners. Casually killing and humiliating commoners will only sow the seeds of hatred and conflict. If this goes on, there will come a day where conflict will erupt." Luke continued to ask, "Then do you feel that knights should have the same status as commoners?" "That's not the case either." Feng Xingjian said, "The status of knights is naturally higher than that of commoners, and their powers are not on the same level. If we were to force them to have the same status, it would only make us live like dragons and snakes. Just the knight's appetite, amount of exercise, and strength are already a huge problem. If the two were to be managed together, it would only cause chaos in the country. However, the superiority of knights should not be based on their cruelty to commoners. Instead, it should be reflected in the knights' generous benefits. As for being able to casually kill commoners, that would only be the actions of demons. It would only destroy the country's foundation, and it's definitely not acceptable." Luke nodded in satisfaction and said, "Then you'll never kill commoners? Those who deserve to be killed will naturally be killed. Commoners are not beasts, but they're definitely not treasures that should be held in one's hands. Overly protective of them will only make them arrogant and conceited, thinking that they are really in control of everything." Feng Xingjian said calmly, "There's a saying that goes, when one is close to them, one will be rude. When one is far away, one will be resentful. One mustn't be too close to them, nor should one be too cruel to them. Maintaining an appropriate distance is the way for knights and commoners to interact." Luke nodded and thought to himself. Although his understanding is still immature, from his perspective, it seems that this is indeed a power that can be absorbed. When one is close to them, one will be rude. When one is far away, one will be resentful. These words have a certain charm to them. Governor Devitt smiled and asked, "Then it's my turn to ask. Xingjian, out of the remaining 16 people in this batch, who do you think is the strongest?" Feng Xingjian said with a matter-of-fact expression, "Of course it's me." When Feng Xingjian said this, his expression was calm and his heartbeat was normal. He was neither arrogant nor conceited, but as if he was saying something very normal. Devitt revealed an interested expression and asked, "Then if you want to spar, who do you want to spar with?" Feng Xingjian gave it some thought and said, "If it's among these 16 people, I'm actually not very interested." He looked at the 4 examiners and said, "But I'm very interested in the 4 of you." The 4 examiners all laughed. Devitt shook his head and said, "If you want to spar with us, you'd better wait until your ether synchronization rate has broken through 50%. The ether synchronization rate is not as simple as the success rate of skill synthesis." Holt came in for the interview. However, as he was representing a divine-level expert, Devitt and the others only had to ask him a few questions. However, when the third person, Anderson, came in, they seemed to be more interested. Devitt asked, "Out of the 16 people, who do you think is the strongest? Feng Xingjian or Holt? He has a level 29 superior divine weapon and can still fight against Feng Xingjian." Although this Anderson, who had transitioned into a shadow death god, looked displeased, he still mentioned Feng Xingjian's name. However, he immediately added, "But that's only for now. After I've completed the second transition, I'll definitely surpass him within 3 years." Devitt smiled and asked, "Then what rank do you think you'll be able to get? Second or third?" Anderson was very short. Sitting on the chair, his legs could not even reach the ground. He swung his legs and said, "If Feng Xingjian is in first place, I might be able to win against Holt. If Holt is in first place, I'll have to fight against Feng Xingjian. His speed is too fast, and I don't have a level 29 divine weapon, so the chances of me winning are very low." Against someone like Fang Xingjian, if you can't win against him, then don't even think about escaping. Before him, if you lose, you'll die. With that, he shrugged and said, therefore, in the end, it all depends on the luck of the lots drawn for the arena battles. Just like that, after going through the interviews one by one, everyone either rested or continued their cultivation. Finally, it was time for the final stage of the regional selection, the arena battles. Chapter 232. The final stage of the regional selection, the arena battle, had finally begun. The venue for this stage was also completely different from the previous 3 stages. The entire arena was placed in a huge arena. The rules for this stage were very simple. Whoever admitted defeat, lost the ability to fight, or stepped out of the arena would be considered the loser. Of course, it was a battle between level 19 knights after all, so there was a limit to the number of casualties. Those who died would be considered to have failed. Naturally, the person who killed the other party was not guilty. Therefore, killing was allowed in this arena. This made the audience feel even more excited and excited. At this time, the entire arena was filled with thousands of people. Amidst the clamor, they were all discussing today's arena. The debate over the first and second place was especially intense. After all, although Fang Xingjian had displayed an overwhelming advantage in terms of talent in the 3rd stage, talent was talent, and combat power was combat power. Of course, Fang Xingjian had displayed unparalleled speed in the 2nd stage, but Holt had also displayed the power of a level 29 god weapon in the 2nd stage. Just the high temperature that covered a radius of several hundred meters was enough to make it difficult for Fang Xingjian to approach. I wonder which 10 people will be able to successfully advance to become Conferred Knights. Conferred Knights. Once they succeed, they'll be able to soar into the skies, and their statuses will be completely different, Kerr City Lord said. Ferdinand analyzed. The fight for 1st and 2nd place would naturally be between Xingjian and Holt. Although Xingjian is powerful, Holt has the level 29 superior divine weapon, Crimson Fire. Once he transforms into a fire dragon to protect Holt, Holt wouldn't even be able to get close. As for the 3rd and 4th place, it should be Anderson and Wei Long. I can't tell the rest of the rankings. City Lord, can you guess it? It's difficult. Cursed City Lord said. They're all knights at the pinnacle of the first transition. Regardless of their attributes, killing techniques, waves, or mental cultivation methods, they are all very close to each other. And at the moment of the battle, all sorts of bizarre and dazzling thoughts, both real and illusory, came gushing forth. Even I am unable to be 100% sure as to how to grasp the situation and how to choose. That's why the outcome of the battle is so unpredictable. Ferdinand started to pray silently in his heart. He had invested a huge sum of money on Fang Xingjian getting 1st place. At the same time, the 16 contestants stepped onto the stage one by one to draw lots. In a corner of the spectator stand, Trija Clan Xiao lowered his head, looking respectfully at the black-robed man. The burly man's entire body was shrouded in a layer of black robe. Only a pair of cold eyes were faintly staring at the arena. His entire body exuded a frightening aura that prevented strangers from approaching him. Sir Adri, Xiao pointed at Fang Xingjian and said, "The first guy on the left is Fang Xingjian." This black-robed man was the younger brother of the Trija clan's clan head, the deputy commander of the Imperial Capital's Forbidden Army, and a level 25 conferred knight, Adri. He stared at Fang Xingjian, his eyes bloodshot. His violent gaze seemed to want to turn the entire arena into ashes. He suffered from an unmentionable disease and could not have sex. It could be said that he hated the world. Thus, he had been extremely extreme since he was young. The only person he treated as family was his older brother. Right now, Countess's whereabouts were unknown, and it was very likely that he had been killed. Of course, he hated Fang Xingjian and wished that he could kill Fang Xingjian. I've already heard the news yesterday. That old man Devitt is now praising Fang Xingjian very highly. The #1 genius in the Great Western region? But the higher one is praised, the more painful the fall will be. This Fang Xingjian, I'll make sure he falls until his bones are crushed. David and his father, Mongol City's city lord, had also arrived at the Battle Coliseum's spectator stand. Looking at the dejected David, Mongol City's city lord was infuriated and said furiously, "Why are you so useless? That Fang Xinjiang has bullied and humiliated you, and you're just going to put up with it? You're even going to give up on taking revenge against him? Father, you haven't seen his performance in the first 3 rounds." David said dispiritedly, "His talent and abilities are both too strong. He's like the sky high up in the sky. No matter how hard you chase after him, you won't be able to catch up to him." Mongol City's city lord naturally did not believe David's words. Although he had heard of Fang Xinjiang's results, in his opinion, he was just a powerful genius. He had seen many powerful geniuses, but before their talent could be turned into abilities, they were just geniuses and not true experts. This was especially so after David's words. What did he mean by the sky high up in the sky? This evaluation was too exaggerated, and Mongol City's city lord did not believe it. He shook his head and said, "You've really disappointed me. A knight will always be a knight. Don't you understand the difference between a knight and a conferred knight? Fang Xinjiang's abilities may seem very impressive to you, but among conferred knights, it's just his speed that's a little special. As for killing a level 21 ferocious beast, it's even less impressive. It's just killing a wild beast that doesn't know martial arts. Of course, I admit that for Fang Xinjiang to be able to do all this at level 19, he does have astonishing potential. But it's precisely because of this that you should go all out and get rid of him completely. If you don't deal with him while he's still weak, are you going to watch as he grows stronger, watching as your humiliation hangs on him forever? But he's already been treated as a treasure by the governor. All the more we can't touch him." David looked at his father's unresigned gaze, shook his head, and sighed. "Forget it, father. You'll understand once you watch Fang Xinjiang's competition." By now, the lot drawing process had been completed, and everyone had confirmed their opponents. The entire process of the arena competition was as follows. 16 people would draw lots at the start, and there would be 8 one-on-one elimination matches. The 8 people who won would be in the top 8, while the 8 people who lost would have to fight for the 9th and 10th place in a round-robin tournament. The 8 people who won would then draw lots again, and there would be 4 matches to decide the top 4. The top 4 would then compete to decide the finalists. The winners would fight for the 1st and 2nd place, while the losers would fight for the 3rd and 4th place. The first match would be between Rhoda and a middle-aged knight. That middle-aged knight was a soldier by the name of Howard. His over 10 years of life on the battlefield had given him an extremely rich battle experience. Regardless of whether it was his attributes, specialties, or killing techniques, they had all been trained to the pinnacle. Looking at the battle between Rhoda and Howard, everyone did not think that Rhoda would win. It was because Rhoda was too young, and it was hard to believe that she would be able to surpass Howard in terms of attributes, specialties, or techniques. This was what Howard thought as well. He carried a machete and leaped onto the arena. Looking at Rhoda, who was like a bean sprout, he smiled and said, "Young lady, you should just surrender. Otherwise, it'd be a pity if such a pretty face is disfigured by me." Rhoda did not say anything. Her disposition was extremely calm. Even though she knew that she was not a match for Howard, there were no fluctuations in her heart at all. She merely held onto her spear, pointing it diagonally at the ground as she looked at Howard with indifference. Howard let out a cold laugh. "It seems that you're not willing to surrender. Then I'll send you off the arena." Before he finished his words, it was as if he had instantly turned into a cheetah. The muscles on his legs contracted crazily, and a violent force exploded under his feet. With a loud bang, he dashed up to Rhoda, bringing along a series of afterimages. The machete in his hand slashed out toward Rhoda's head at the fastest speed and with the greatest force. He had spoken in a frivolous manner, as if he was looking down on Rhoda. However, in reality, he had gone all out right from the start, not showing any mercy at all. This was the truth. At the stage of the top 16 in the regional selection, which person would look down on their opponent and show mercy to the fair sex? That would be treating their own life and future as a joke. At the stage of the regional selection, even if the person before them was the world's greatest beauty, they would still slash her if they wanted to. Whoever stood in their way of becoming a conferred knight, they would naturally fight to the death. On the other hand, the reason why he had acted so frivolously was to confuse Rhoda, to make her think that he was looking down on her. He would then go all out, slashing out explosively with his machete, creating a psychological misconception. However, Rhoda seemed to have expected this. Ever since she had comprehended the Pantheon monument, she had sunk into a state of calmness. It was as if she would be able to let go of her spirit at any moment, truly attaining heaven's perception. Right now, despite Howard's explosive slash, she was still unable to break this calmness. She retreated 3 steps, dodging 3 of Howard's attacks. Amidst the 3 slashes, the saber slashes were executed consecutively, and the saber light flashed. Each slash got closer and closer to Rhoda's face, and the 4th slash would slash open Rhoda's stomach. This was Howard's killing technique, Gale Quickblade. As long as his opponent was unable to fend off his consecutive attacks, he would continue to perform the 49 consecutive moves of the Gale Quickblade. His speed would become increasingly faster, and his power would also become increasingly stronger. In the end, there would be no way to block his attacks. Chapter 233. Just as Howard was about to slash out for the 4th time, the tip of Rhoda's spear, which had paused for a long time, finally stabbed out for the first time. The Void Penetrative Divine Spear was activated, and this stab came out from the ground, instantly piercing through Howard's soul. Howard let out a muffled groan and took a dozen steps back. Blood was already gushing out his feet. "How did you do that?" He stared at Rhoda and asked. The Void Penetrative Divine Spear shouldn't be able to pierce through your blind spot. Although the Void Penetrative Divine Spear was very powerful, it did not come with any additional attributes. Furthermore, it had a weakness, which was that it could not pierce out from places that the naked eye could not see. That was to say, it could not pierce out from within another person's body, clothes, armor, or even under the soles of their feet. However, Rhoda had just achieved the impossible. Hearing Howard's question, Rhoda shook her head and said, "Although you look like a lion hunting a rabbit and are using your full strength, you still look down on me. Otherwise, you wouldn't have wanted to perform the Gale Quick Saber's 49 slashes right off the bat. Using the Hurricane Quick Blade combo right from the start meant that you didn't think that I would be able to break your move. It's because of this layer of contempt that you didn't discover what you should have discovered." After Rhoda said this, she thrust out her spear once again. This time around, Howard was on full alert, but he raised his machete upward. It was as if he had slashed an invisible long spear, and a crisp bang rang out. He immediately reacted. "Your spear tip is invisible? Earlier on, you activated the Void Penetrative Divine Spear right from the start, only revealing less than an inch of the spear tip on the ground. However, it was invisible, so I did not notice it. Were you waiting for me to step on it myself? You only activated the Void Penetrating Divine Spear the moment before I stepped on it." That's right. Although the Void Penetrative Divine Spear can't be activated in blind spots, the Void Penetrative Divine Spear that has already been activated can still be activated even if one's vision is blocked. Realizing this, Howard was filled with regret. If he had really treated Rhoda as an opponent of the same level, then he would have been on full alert from the start. When he saw Rhoda retreating 3 times consecutively, he might have been able to discover this trick of hers. But now it was all over. The sole of his foot had been pierced, and it was difficult for him to move. All of a sudden, his odds of winning were greatly reduced. On the Pantheon monument, Rhoda had comprehended the astral rays, which could distort light waves and change light radiation. Rhoda vibrated her long spear, and the entire small silver spear was like a violent, huge dragon. It brought along streams of gang cheese and explosions as it pierced and lashed out toward Howard from over 10 meters away. However, after blocking a few moves, Howard activated his reduced force field at full power, temporarily shaking off the long spear before jumping out of the arena and saying, "I admit defeat for this round." Seeing that Rhoda was looking at him in astonishment, Howard said, "You're right. I underestimated my opponent too much, so I definitely won't make this mistake again. I've already treated you as an enemy of the same level, so I won't think that I can still win against you after one of my legs is seriously injured. I'll choose to rest straight away to conserve my strength and fight for the 9th and 10th places with the other 7 people who lost in the first round." Just like that, the first battle ended at the speed of lightning. Regardless of whether it was Howard's emotional attack at the start, Rhoda's ingenious trap, or Howard's decisive decision at the end, they had all displayed a battle of wits and courage between knights. On the arena, Adri nodded and said, "This Howard is decisive and knows how to cut his losses. He does have some spirit. That young lady is crafty and interesting. But it's also because she's lucky to have met an opponent she can defeat." Seeing that Howard had backed off, Rhoda let out a deep breath and thought to herself, "I've finally succeeded." After this victory, Rhoda entered the top 8. Regardless of whether she won or lost, she would have passed the regional selection without any problems. Following that, a few more matches were played. Anderson and Wei Lung both won easily, and it was finally Manny's turn. The opponent he had drawn for this round was the Astral Ancestor's grand disciple, Holt, who had the potential to become the champion. Everyone in the Battle Coliseum looked at Manny as if they were looking at an unlucky person. And that was true. Was there anyone who was more unlucky than drawing Holt in the first round? Then he would probably have to draw Fong Xingjian. Rhoda frowned, looked at Manny, and said, "Just give up. You can conserve your energy and fight for the 9th or 10th place." Fong Xingjian did not say a word, as if he did not agree or disagree with this. Manny also smiled, as if he could sense the various pitiful, mocking gazes from the crowd. He said, "It's fine. Xingjian, I'll go up and help you measure his attainments before fighting for the 9th place." Holt was already standing on the arena. Seeing Manny walking over, he smiled elegantly. "You're very courageous. You could be considered a real knight." Manny smiled and shook his head. "In the previous regional selection, I was defeated by a demonic genius like you, and ended up not being able to go through the second transition. I've even been dispirited for many years because of this. Regardless of the outcome of this battle, if I were to cower, I'll probably never be able to go through the second transition in this lifetime. So that's how it is." Holt said, "Although I admire your courage, I've never given in to anyone in the arena. I couldn't ask for more." Manny let out a breath and said, "Draw your sword." Holt shook his head and casually tossed the level 29 superior divine weapon, Crimson Fire, to one side. That crimson-red long sword immediately attracted everyone's gazes. Holt said, "If I were to use Crimson Fire to deal with you, it'd be too much of a bully. In today's arena battle, I'll only use Crimson Fire when I'm dealing with Fong Xingjian." Manny smiled. His smiling gaze was filled with majestic fury. "That's how it is. I really don't understand why geniuses like you're always looking down on others." At the end of his words, he abruptly slapped down across space, and the area within a range of 100 meters seemed to have doubled in weight. The ground cracked, and the air became heavy. It was as if they had suddenly arrived in the deep sea. Just this pressure from the gravity was enough to make ordinary knights drop to their knees. However, Holt smiled as if he did not feel anything and said, "The gravity seems to have become a little heavier, but I can't really feel such a small change." Manny's brows furrowed fiercely. To think that Fong Xingjian did not even budge in the slightest under the pressure of 2 times the gravity. "Oh, right. Have you seen the Milky Way before?" At the next moment, countless flashing light spots shot out from Holt's palms. They surrounded his body like the nebula and Milky Way in the universe and continued to expand outwards. The entire scene was extremely beautiful and extravagant. It could be said to be the most beautiful move since the start of the arena battle, causing countless aristocratic ladies to gasp in astonishment. Chapter 234. Looking at the brilliant Milky Way, which was getting increasingly bigger, Holt said calmly, "Do you know? A long, long time ago, there used to be countless brilliant Milky Way in the starry sky above our heads. My killing technique, Astral Tempest, was created based on this." The bones of knights were extremely strong. Their bone marrow was countless times stronger than that of ordinary people, and it was the same for their stem cells and osteoblasts. Therefore, their bones grew at a faster rate, and it was harder for them to suffer fractures compared to ordinary people. Even if they did, they would recover faster. Holt's Milky Way was formed from countless bone cells. These bone cells were eliminated from his body every day, and after being refined by the Astral Tempest, they were infused with the power of ether particles. Holt's Astral Tempest would be renewed daily according to his bone cells, and it would be completely replaced every 10 days. This meant that the strength of his Astral Tempest would continue to grow alongside his growth. Right now, Holt was a level 19 knight at the pinnacle of his level, and the Astral Tempest formed from the bone cells in his body was naturally at the level of a level 19 inferior divine weapon. Although Manny did not know the prowess of the Astral Tempest, looking at the dazzling Milky Way, which filled up the entire place and was flashing with silver light, his brain kept on feeling an extreme sense of danger. Holt stood in the center of the Astral Tempest, looking at the surrounding Milky Way, and said calmly, "Dance, Milky Way." Boom! At the next moment, the entire Astral Tempest seemed to have turned from a calm sea into a tropical storm. The Milky Way soared into the sky, bringing along a tsunami-like majestic power and smashing out fiercely toward Manny. Due to the toughness of a level 19 inferior divine weapon, any one of the light spots had a prowess like a bullet. Moreover, they were densely packed together, and their combined powers were like mountains and seas. It was not something that a physical body would be able to fend off. With a loud rumble, Manny's location was completely engulfed by the Astral Tempest. However, Holt turned his head and looked to his right. Manny had dashed over here without him knowing. With a smack, Manny struck out across space, and a violent gravitational field came crashing down onto Holt's body. It was as if a crane had smashed down. Clear air ripples appeared around Holt, and the surrounding Astral Tempest was instantly pressed down to the ground. Countless cracks appeared on the ground under Holt's feet, and his feet sank 3 inches into the ground. However, he was still completely unscathed. Not to mention being injured, his spine did not bend in the slightest. "You attack me again?" He smiled, and the surrounding Astral Tempest seemed to have been summoned once again, surrounding Manny from all directions. With a loud bang, the endless silver specks of light collided with each other. It was as if Mars had collided with the Earth, or as if tens of thousands of thunderbolts had sounded at the same time. But when the river of stars retreated, it revealed a dark black wall. It turned out that before Manny was besieged, he had flipped up the surrounding ground with a single punch and then reinforced it with supergravity, blocking off the Galaxy Tempest attack. However, it was only able to block this attack. In just a short 1 second, the Astral Tempest struck out once again. Hundreds of thousands of piercing attacks were launched every second, shattering the entire earthen wall into pieces. Manny leaped up high, dodging another attack from the Astral Tempest. However, Holt smiled as he watched Manny's actions. From the beginning to the end, his hands were in his knight attire, watching as the Astral Tempest casually attacked Manny. Right now, Manny was leaping up high, and countless light spots gathered below him, waiting for the fatal blow when he landed. It's over. The Astral Tempest attack power, area of effect, and attack speed are all too powerful. Jumping into the air will only lead to death. Is this Holt's power? To think that I had thought that Feng Xinjiang would come in first. I've really underestimated the divine level legacies. Just as these thoughts flashed past the minds of the spectators, the corners of Manny's lips curled up into a hint of a smile. It was as if he had also sensed the countless gazes of pity, astonishment, and ridicule. Just as his speed became increasingly slower and he was about to reach the highest point of his jump, his hands pushed out fiercely to the left and right, and he suddenly stopped in midair as if he had been frozen. Holt smiled. As expected, you're already able to control your own gravity. However, you won't be able to defeat me just by floating. Manny said confidently, it's true that your astral tempest is very powerful. If it were to hit me, it would be able to take my life at any moment. However, its weakness is also very obvious. Holt looked at Manny curiously and asked, "Oh, what is it?" "It's that they're very strong, but they don't have enough power. Otherwise, it's impossible that they couldn't even break through my defense earlier." As he spoke, Manny put his palms together and activated his killing technique, Earth King Avatar. In an instant, the entire arena was encompassed by waves of gravitational waves. Amidst the ripples in the air that could be seen by the naked eye, the gravity in the entire arena was increasing rapidly. The ground kept on cracking, and the extremely active astral tempest gradually came to a stop. It was as if many snakes had been hit at their weak points, all of them being pressed down onto the ground. Sweat kept on trickling down Manny's forehead. It was all thanks to the comprehension he had gained from the Pantheon Monument that he was able to perform the Earth King Avatar's supergravity domain. Right now, he was in midair, and the astral tempest, which was suppressed by the gravity, was unable to attack him. Holt could only passively receive his attacks. It's very difficult to really defeat him. However, if I can continue to suppress him like this and think of a way to send him out of the arena. Just as Manny was thinking of this, he once again saw Holt smile. "So that's how it is. It seems that you've misunderstood something," Holt said calmly. At the same time, he brushed his bangs, smiled, and said, "Do you know? When I was training in the Myriad Stars Palace, the basic state of every place, there was at least 10 times the normal gravity. Therefore, your attacks are actually of no use against me. As for the so-called weakness of the astral tempest," at the next moment, streams of silver light lit up in Holt's eyes. It was as if a Milky Way had also appeared in his eyes. Earlier on, I wasn't even controlling him. If I were to really control him, it would probably be like this. Before he finished his words, the Milky Way on the ground burst out with a silver light that was 10 times brighter. Then it was as if a light pillar had soared up into the sky, completely encompassing Manny's body. Amidst agonizing cries, Manny, who was covered in blood, fell out of the arena. However, before he landed, he once again clenched his fists tightly. Holt's countenance changed slightly. In that instant, his gravity was reversed, and he soared up into the sky like a rocket. In the blink of an eye, he had already flown out. Manny floated slowly in midair, and his bloodied face broke into a smile. Even if Feng Xinjian could return later on, the strong gales and atmosphere in the sky would have long since blown him out. It would be impossible for him to return to his original position. This was Manny's last resort. Have I won? Manny stared at the increasingly smaller black dot in the sky. He could sense that Feng Xinjian had already left the gravitational field that he could control. Next, Feng Xinjian's speed gradually decreased, and then he started to descend. At the same time, he was blown away by the strong gales in the sky, completely deviating from the battle coliseum. Just as Manny was thinking of this, a hint of demonic light suddenly flashed in Holt's eyes. The killing technique, Astral Body's projection, was activated. Chapter 235. The astral tempest in the air condensed abruptly, and in the blink of an eye, it had already formed a silver figure. The figure's physique and appearance were those of Holt. The killing technique, astral projection, could transfer one's consciousness to and control objects that one came into contact with for a long period of time. Manny looked at this scene in astonishment. Holt, who was formed from the astral tempest, smiled and dashed out. His silver palm pressed down fiercely on Manny's head, smashing Manny onto the ground outside the arena with a loud boom. Then the astral tempest, once again, turned into a silver river that danced in the air. It crossed the sky and caught Holt, who had lost consciousness. It then carefully sent Holt's physical body onto the arena. In the end, the astral tempest dissipated abruptly, and Holt once again regained his consciousness and opened his eyes. He nodded at Manny and said, "Your killing technique, Earth King imagery has already surpassed level 10, right? Otherwise, it would be impossible for you to achieve gravity reversal. It's true that you're an expert in controlling gravity, but our Myriad Stars Palace is even more of an expert in this field. Although I don't cultivate in the path of gravity, I have a lot of experience in dealing with it. Otherwise, your chances would be higher. Manny let out a breath and said, "What's the point of saying so much? A loss is a loss. I'll wait to see how you and Xinjiang will fight for first place." Holt won against Manny. This battle once again displayed Holt's valiance as a divine-level successor. Regardless of whether it was his killing technique, astral tempest, or his astral projection, or his powerful physique that could withstand 10 times the gravity, they were all strong foundations that could allow one to stand at the pinnacle of knights. Amazing. Adri let out a deep breath. This second transition, level 25 conferred knight looked at Holt and could not help but utter the word amazing. To think that a knight can be so powerful. As expected of a divine-level legacy, the Myriad Stars Palace's ultimate technique. I finally witnessed it today. Everyone had witnessed Holt's prowess in this battle. They could not help but look forward to how powerful Fang Xingjian would be in the next arena battle. Looking at Fang Xingjian, Adri stared at him and mumbled, "I want to see what abilities you have." The city lord of Mongol City was the same. All his attention was focused on Fang Xingjian. He wanted to take a good look at this genius who had destroyed his son's ambitions. He wanted to see how powerful he was. After Fang Xingjian ascended the platform, a black-haired, black-eyed, yellow-skinned knight was still breathing deeply. This knight was over 50 years old. His name was Meng Hao, and he was a veteran knight. Although he had entered the top 16, he had been very inconspicuous in the first 3 rounds of the competition. It could even be said that he was invisible. But at this moment, knowing that he was about to fight one of the favorites to win the championship, Fang Xingjian, he felt the blood in his body boiling. Feeling the gazes of all the spectators in the arena, he sneered in his heart. "Haha, you guys are looking down on me. Just look down on me, despise me, and look down on me. I will give all of you a big shock and let you know what true power is." Half a year ago, Meng Hao was still an ordinary knight. However, half a year ago, he met a few men in black. They spoke a language he did not understand and wore clothes he had never seen before. They grabbed him and brought him to a place that was made entirely of metal. They used a knife to cut open his head and inserted something into it. They told him that if he did not listen to them, they would use the thing inside to cook his brain into tofu. At the start, Meng Hao was naturally very uncooperative. However, after being punished several times and having his head hurt so much that it felt like it was going to explode, he gradually gave in. Then, 5 months ago, his chest and back were engraved with layers of complicated patterns by the men in black. It was like a tattoo, but it was many times more magical than a tattoo. These were magic prints, a powerful sorcery that could allow one to receive diabolic energy in Miracle World. Meng Hao took a deep breath, and his entire body swelled up as if he was blowing air. The skin on the surface of his body became increasingly tough and shiny, as if it was covered with layers of crystals. Crackling sounds of explosions rang out incessantly from his body. It was the sound of his bones vibrating violently, as if steel bars were striking against each other. Amidst the series of explosions, Meng Hao's body shot up to a height of over 3 meters in the blink of an eye. He was like a giant god that had descended to the mortal world. The surface of his muscles glowed, as if they were made of titanium alloy, displaying extraordinary strength and toughness. Roar! Meng Hao, whose strength had skyrocketed, let out a loud roar. An intense force shot out from his mouth, and, in that instant, it caused countless spectators in the stands to feel dizzy. Meng Hao's knight attire also swelled up along with his body. It did not tear at all, and under the knight attire, the tattoos on his chest and back were emitting hints of red light. That was the diabolic energy being channeled into his body. Meng Hao took a step forward, and a small pit with a width of 1 meter appeared on the ground. He then took another step forward, walking toward the arena. His feet were like 2 bombs, continuously stepping on the ground. It was as if a bomb had exploded, causing the spectators and the surroundings to have the illusion that the earth was shaking and the mountains were shaking. He then stomped on the ground fiercely, and a sonic boom rang out. A crater with a diameter of 10 meters appeared on the ground under his feet, and he appeared in the arena as if he had teleported. He then took another step forward, and his entire body came to a stop at an extremely fast speed. However, the arena seemed to be unable to withstand his attacks from such a close distance, and it was smashed into pieces by this stomp, turning into over 10 huge rocks lying on the ground. Such power and aura were so ferocious that they did not seem to belong to a human. At this moment, all the spectators understood that this ordinary-looking Meng Hao was not only not a newbie, but also a great expert. He was an expert who had tempered his body to a point where it far surpassed that of a knight, and could even be compared to a conferred knight. "All right, this match is going to be interesting," Adri said. This Meng Hao's explosive power is already at the level of a conferred knight. To think that he was able to train his attributes to such a level. There are really crouching tigers and hidden dragons in the regional selection. Meng Hao's continuous explosive power, his appearance, and his soaring aura immediately caused everyone's appetite to drop. They watched this arena battle with great curiosity, anticipating the battle between Meng Hao and Fang Xingjian. To them, even if Meng Hao was not a match for Fang Xingjian, he was not far from it. He should be able to reveal a large portion of Fang Xingjian's battle prowess. On the spectator stand, a few black-robed men were also looking at the arena. One of them was even holding a book and recording something. Has it finally started? Then let's see what exactly is going on with the diabolic energy being ineffective. Chapter 236. Right now, Meng Hao's expression was extremely wild. There was no sign of the cautiousness and forbearance he had shown over the past few decades. Feeling the gazes of over 1,000 gazes on him, he only felt extremely satisfied. He had a feeling of exhilaration and exhilaration. This feeling made his aura even stronger. Coupled with his physique and prowess, it made him look like the Hulk was fighting Captain America when he stood before Fang Xingjian. Moreover, he was well aware of how powerful the diabolic energy in his body was. There were a total of 12 types of diabolic energy. Therefore, they were split into the mage's 12 major systems and 12 types of sorcery. The sorcery he was currently using was the red sorcery, performed by a powerful red-robed mage. Among the 12 types of sorcery, red sorcery was the sorcery that was most proficient in strengthening one's physique, power, and body's toughness. It was also one of the sorcery that excelled in head-on battles. He looked at Fang Xingjian and said with a cold smile, "Fang Xingjian, you didn't expect this, did you? You thought that it was just an earthworm standing in front of you, but it suddenly turned into a huge dragon. Aren't you very shocked and disappointed? You want to fight against Holt and snatch first place in the regional selection. But I also want to push you down for being one of the hot favorites to fight against Holt. Earthworm, huge dragon?" Fang Xingjian slowly pulled out the sticks from his waist. Looking at the prints on the sticks, Fang Xingjian shook his head and said, "There's a saying that even a pearl the size of a rice grain can also shine. Do you know that?" Meng Hao frowned. There was no such saying in Miracle World. However, he could instinctively sense the disdain in Fang Xingjian's words. Therefore, he asked with a sunken expression, "What do you mean?" Fang Xingjian's finger flicked the sticks lightly, releasing a melodious and clear sword chime. "It means that even a pearl the size of a rice grain can shine before a gemstone." Fang Xingjian shook his head. "You've trained hard for so many years, and your strength is hard to come by. Since that's the case, why come up here to be humiliated?" Meng Hao's eyes flashed with rage. Ever since he had acquired the power of the heretical god, what he hated most was people looking down on him like this. To him, Fang Xingjian's behavior was the ultimate insult. "Humph, we'll know who's the rice grain and who's the pearl after we fight." After saying this, Meng Hao's fist, which was the size of a casserole pot, punched out fiercely through the air. In that instant, the reduced force field exploded crazily, causing sand and rocks to fly all over the dilapidated arena. The surging power hit the air directly, creating an air current that was like a shock wave, heading towards Feng Xingjian. Then came another punch, and another, and another. Meng Hao's hands seemed to transform into over 100 afterimages. Because of the shocking speed of his punches, the wild power superimposed over each other in the air. The rows of air currents had not even hit their target when the ones at the back had already caught up to them, squeezing them together. Just like that, the power from the hundreds and thousands of punches superimposed over each other in the air currents, heading towards Feng Xingjian from one side of the arena. As long as one left the arena, it would be considered a loss. Therefore, Meng Hao's move meant that Feng Xingjian would not be able to escape and could only take it head-on. By superimposing the force from his punches through the air as a medium, this was the killing technique, stacked force. However, ordinary knights would at most be able to superimpose 10 to 20 layers of power. But right now, Meng Hao was relying on his endless physical strength, his speed that surpassed the speed of sound, and his wild strength that was like that of a dinosaur. He had actually managed to superimpose the force from hundreds of punches, turning them into a shock wave that blasted towards Feng Xingjian. At this moment, his entire body was emitting intense white steam, as if he was an engine operating at full speed. The temperature was so high that even his skin had turned red, like a cooked prawn. Such a ferocious explosion caused the eyes of countless spectators to widen. When had they ever seen someone perform the ordinary killing technique, stacked force, to such an extent? The toughness of this Meng Hao's body has already surpassed that of a level 21 colossal armed ape, and he can even perform martial techniques. Ferocious, it's really too ferocious. Let's see how Feng Xingjian is going to defend against this. In that instant, this thought flashed through the minds of countless knights present. Faced with Meng Hao's extremely ferocious attack, Feng Xingjian did not even think of using his speed or sword intent to attack his opponent's flaws. In today's arena battle, he was aiming to crush all the examinees, to shock all the knights, and to take first place with his unparalleled abilities. What did it mean to be unparalleled? It meant to crush his opponents in every single aspect, maintaining an absolute difference in battle prowess with all the examinees. Only then would he be able to obtain the most resources and meet the least trouble after the regional selection. He would also be able to extinguish at least 99% of those who still harbored enmity towards him. Therefore, when faced with Meng Hao's attack, he did not dodge, nor did he attack his opponent's flaws. Instead, he wanted to use an even more violent and ferocious attack to crush his opponent. Therefore, Feng Xingjian did not hesitate to perform Terra Ingurgitation, a great move that could only be performed once every hour with the prodigious astral divine powers waves. In that instant, everyone within a 1-kilometer radius felt a sense of weightlessness. In that short instant, be it humans, animals, houses, walls, or even stones, teacups, horse carriages, grass, everything felt as if they were about to move, as if they were floating toward the sky. It was because at this moment, all the gravity that they had been enduring had been gathered onto Feng Xingjian's body. Then as Feng Xingjian slashed out with his sword, the gravity gushed out toward the front of his blade. How violent was the gravitational force of all objects within a 1-kilometer radius? Putting everything else aside, even if the gravity of the entire arena and the audience were to gather together, it would already be an extremely terrifying force. Not to mention that there were at least dozens of carriages, more than 10 bungalows, and countless rocks and trees within a 1-kilometer radius. And now, as Feng Xingjian slashed out with his sword, the world within a 1-kilometer radius seemed to have turned upside down. Everyone felt as if they were flying, and all the gravity was gathered onto Feng Xingjian's sword attack, smashing onto the shock waves before Meng Hao. Bang, 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 bang. The shock waves smashed onto the sticks. However, it was like a bunch of ants trying to shake a tree, or like a bunch of ants smashing into a mountain. The shock waves were crushed by the unbelievably majestic force. Meng Hao, who was still punching out, felt a surge of power flowing toward him. Before this surge of power, his explosive attack was as weak as a piece of toilet paper and was instantly destroyed. Too powerful, too ferocious. At the instant when he was slashed by the long sword, the last thing that popped up in Meng Hao's mind was what Feng Xingjian had said earlier. Even a grain of rice can shine. The next moment, his consciousness was completely engulfed by the ferocious power. Chapter 237. This sword attack contained the weight of everything within a 1-kilometer radius. It was as heavy as the heavens and earth. Before it even got close to Meng Hao's body, the violent air currents had already formed layers of gang cheese under the pressure of this power, tearing Meng Hao's body apart completely. Several tens of thousands of tons? Several hundreds of thousands of tons? Or several million tons? No one knew how much weight had been released by Feng Xingjian's sword attack. It was as if a fuel-air explosive had been thrown into the arena, and the white force turned into visible waves that blew out in all directions. Amidst the intense tremors, sand and rocks were sent flying. All the rocks and sand were sent flying. This was only the hurricane that had just started. When the power of this sword attack was released onto the ground, the entire arena was instantly pressed into the ground. Then, as if there was an earthquake in the arena, a crack over 100 meters long was torn open in the ground. Over 1,000 people left their seats. Because they had temporarily lost their weight, they were all sent flying up over half a meter into the air. The walls on the west side of the arena cracked open like a cake that had been sliced open. Both the ground and the walls were trembling like tidal waves, creating ripples that spread out in all directions. Then gravity returned to everyone's bodies, and they all returned to the ground. However, amidst a series of exclamations, a large part of the arena had collapsed. The entire arena had disappeared, turning into a crater that had been torn apart. Tons of sand and sand were sent flying into the sky from the violent impact, turning into dust. At this moment, it was as if a natural disaster had descended. Amidst the dust, Governor Devitt waved his hand calmly, and over 100 huge ice dragons appeared in the void space. Some of the ice dragons passed through the dust, absorbing the sand and sand into their bodies. Some of the ice dragons moved the crushed rocks and repaired the walls, protecting the spectators and preventing any accidents from happening. However, those who could come to watch the competition were all aristocrats. Even if they did not have the physique of a knight, their attributes were definitely not bad. Naturally, they would not get into trouble just because of a mere small earthquake. Therefore, Governor Devitt spent a little more effort to clean up the scene once again. Right now, only Feng Xingjian was still standing in the center of the arena. Meng Hao's voice could not be heard. A few black-robed men in the crowd frowned. One of them said the power enhancement effect is still there. Meng Hao's body was still enhanced by the red sorcery until the two of them collided. He didn't weaken at all. But when Feng Xingjian arrived, all of the force fields protecting Meng Hao's body and strengthening his fleshly body disappeared. Otherwise, according to the magical marks we laid down, he wouldn't have been reduced to nothing. All in all, this matter is no longer something that we can handle. Let's report it to the higher-ups. At the same time, Feng Xingjian stood in the middle of the field with his sword in hand. His mind was still replaying the scene from before. Before his sword could even reach Meng Hao's body, the pressure from the air caused his knight's attire to be torn apart. Through his heaven's perception, he could see the prints on the other party's body. Magic inscriptions? Had the earth already begun to infiltrate, or has it been infiltrated for a long time? On the other side, the spectators were still recalling Feng Xingjian's earlier world-changing sword attack. Adri looked at Feng Xingjian in a daze and kept on saying, that sword attack earlier shifted all the gravitational force in the surroundings, shifting all of our weight onto his sword. Not only was the gravitational force perfectly shifted, but there wasn't even the slightest bit of rebounding damage. It's really exquisite. And after the gravity shift, the explosion of power is really ferocious, too ferocious. This is the martial technique he comprehended from the Pantheon Monument. as expected of the legacy of a divine-level expert. I thought that he had just received the legacy and had yet to mature. To think that he has already reached such a level? All the more reason why we can't let him continue to grow. Otherwise, we'll probably never have the chance to seek revenge. On the other side, Mongol City's city lord kept recalling Fang Xinjian's earlier sword attack in his mind, trying to figure out the explosive power in that instant. That attack earlier borrowed the explosive power of gravity within a range of 300 meters or more. This is no longer a power that can be used by flesh and blood. To think that a first transition knight can borrow a portion of the tremendous powers of the heavens and the earth. The legacy of the melancholic monarch is really amazing, really amazing. Letting out a deep sigh, Mongol City's city lord had known that Fang Xinjian had cracked the Pantheon monument. However, he had thought that even if it was the legacy of a divine-level expert, Fang Xinjian would need at least a few months before he would be able to achieve results, and a few years before he would be able to dominate the world. However, it seemed that Fang Xinjian was already able to perform such a ferocious attack in just one day. This had far surpassed his expectations. He patted David on the shoulder and sighed, saying, "Let's return to Mongol City." This sword attack from Fang Xinjian had indeed dispelled the thoughts of many people who had harbored enmity towards him. This was also the difference between Adri and David and the others. Adri represented the Trija clan and Fang Xinjian, who would not rest until one of them was dead, while David and Fang Xinjian still had room for reconciliation. If Holt's previous battle could be said to be an elegant way of dealing with his opponent like an aristocrat, displaying all sorts of methods, and displaying his deep and unfathomable power, then in this battle, Fang Xinjian had used the most brutal and barbaric methods to crush his opponent to death. At the edge of the arena, the gazes of all the participants as they looked at Fang Xinjian had changed. Anderson's pupils contracted, as if he was a cat that had been threatened. He subconsciously entered a defensive state. Holt's right hand continued to caress the hilt of the Crimson Fire Sword. It was because right now, only this level 29 superior divine weapon could give him absolute confidence. The spectators' stand was filled with chatter. From time to time, many astonished and fearful gazes would sweep toward Fang Xinjian, their gazes filled with deep wariness. On the examiner's stand, Governor Devitt sighed. Meng Hao is also a pretty good seed. Although his talent is a little lacking, to be able to cultivate his body to such a level, his will must be extremely strong. It'd be great if he didn't die. Simultaneously, his gaze toward Fang Xinjian grew even more scorching. This legacy of the melancholic monarch must remain in our great western region, Governor Devitt said with a scorching gaze. I suggest that after Fang Xinjian enters the academy, we open up the academy's highest grade sacred land for him. What? Luke, the oldest of the four examiners, said, the highest grade sacred land has always been reserved for you and the students from the Northern Railway Station's national selection. To give Fang Xinjian such good treatment right after he joins the academy, there might be students who are not convinced. What's there to be unconvinced about? Governor Devitt said proudly. Fang Xinjian's aptitude is sufficient for us to invest in him. Moreover, you've already talked about his thoughts and political inclinations. There's nothing inappropriate about it. Luke still shook his head and said, I feel that we're still too hasty. We should be more careful with nurturing a person like Fang Xinjian and put him through more tests. Otherwise, once he matures and goes out of control, the damage he'll cause will be 10 or even 100 times that of ordinary students. Just as the two of them were arguing, Armstrong, whose face was filled with scars, stood up and said, All right, there's no point in arguing here. Why don't we talk about this after the regional selection? I'll go and fix up the Battle Coliseum first. To be honest, she kept having the feeling that Fang Xinjian was in a very dangerous state. Although she also trained hard, she still needed some time every day or every week to relax. However, after hearing Rhoda's words, Fang Xinjian gave a rare reply. He gave it some thought before replying. There's no limit to martial arts. putting aside those below the divine level. Even after attaining the divine level, every divine level expert will be cultivating in seclusion, exploring the endless profoundness. Life was too short, so short that it passed in the blink of an eye. To use such a short amount of time to explore the endless profoundness of martial arts, one must cherish every bit of time. Any slacking off would be a waste of one's life. After saying this, Fang Xingjian did not say another word. His physical body was automatically cultivating sword arts 24 hours a day. Even when he did not need to think or speak, his mind would still be continuously cultivating sword arts. It was because his time was much tighter than what he had said. Rhoda shook her head and turned to look. She saw that there were even more people in the spectator stands. Right now, the top 8 of the regional selection were getting more and more heated up. In this year's regional selection, every single one of them would affect the budget of the regional academies in the future. The amount of money involved in every single one of them was calculated in terms of 10,000 gold, not to mention the various bets that involved hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right now, the top 8 had attracted the attention of countless aristocrats in the Great Western region. It could be said that the upcoming top 8 not only affected the future of the 12 prefectural royal academies in the Great Western region, but it also affected the wealth of countless aristocrats in the Great Western region. They already possessed the influence to stir up a region. Under the control of Examiner Armstrong, the ground was filled up again, and the arena once again rose up from the soil. It was now covered with a thick layer of metallic luster. It was clear that a large amount of metal had been mixed in, greatly increasing the toughness of the arena. The battle coliseum, which had been cracked and could have collapsed, was also mended up, returning to its original state. Although Armstrong did not fight, just his ability to control the earth, change the soil, and control metal and rocks had already displayed his great power as a conferred knight. However, no one cared about his current abilities. Everyone's gazes were fixed on the arena, anticipating the start of the next match. The first match of the top 8 was between number 1, Fang Xingjian, and number 2, Alan. The two of them walked up to the newly built metal arena. Alan was a man who was completely covered in green long robes. From the start of the regional selection until now, he had always been fighting with his bare hands and legs. However, he had comprehended the first level of profoundness in the Pantheon Monument observation, showing that he had extraordinary aptitude. However, now that he was before Fang Xingjian, he finally started to remove his green robes bit by bit. Initially, I had wanted to save these trump cards for the very end. However, since I've already met you in the top 8, then there's no need for me to hold them back. His words showed that he was extremely fearful of Fang Xingjian's abilities. In the blink of an eye, he removed his green robes, revealing a body that was covered in all sorts of horrifying scars, bloodstains, poisonous sores, and pus. With him revealing his body, over 30% of the people on the arena had their eyebrows twitching. Some young aristocratic ladies were so frightened that they closed their eyes, as if they had just experienced a nightmare. Alan looked at his body and broke into a brutal smile. The killing technique I cultivate, Myriad Poison Battle God, gathers countless poisons and makes them treat my body as a battlefield. They keep on fighting and killing each other, and I make use of the life force they unleash to cultivate my physical body. Although poisons have great destructive prowess, they also have great life force. Otherwise, how would they be able to survive in this world? Only people who have comprehended this will be able to make use of poisons to cultivate their physical body. The balance of the poisons in my body is being broken at every moment, and the toxicity is changing at every moment. Therefore, after being poisoned by me, before he could finish his words, Fang Xingjian shook his head and said, "Right now, what I hate the most are people who play with poisons in battles." With that, Fang Xingjian walked up to Alan's back with a single step, and with a tremble of his long sword, he pierced toward Alan's back. It was true that Alan had some tricks up his sleeves. Almost at the instant Fang Xingjian disappeared, he rolled on the ground, wanting to dodge Fang Xingjian's sword attack. At the same time, a stream of poisonous smoke rose up from where he had been standing, drifting toward Feng Xingjian. However, how could Feng Xingjian allow him to leave? He retreated and dodged the poisonous smoke. At the same time, two streams of ether sword ripples slashed out from the left and right, slashing Alan, who had been rolling on the ground, into a toad. With an agonizing cry, Alan was sent flying, and a series of poisonous smoke shot out. Feng Xingjian let out a cold snort and circled around the poisonous smoke, drawing a great arc. He then thrust out 188 sword attacks consecutively. Poisonous blood splattered, and amidst a series of agonizing cries, Alan was slashed out one sword attack after another. Little did he know that just the act of him poisoning Alan had already infuriated Feng Xingjian. In the following battles, Wei Lung, Anderson, and Holt seemed to have been affected by Feng Xingjian's vicious attack. They all started to attack viciously. Chapter 239. In the second battle of the top 8, Anderson's opponent was a man called Caesar. The moment the two of them went up the stage, they did not say anything and just started fighting. This could be said to be the only battle in the arena battle where there was no conversation at all. That burly man named Kaiser was clad entirely in a suit of steel armor. This steel armor was at the level of a level 9 Empire Divine weapon and was extremely valuable. Clearly, it was specially forged for him by the academy or clan behind him. In his hand, he was holding a long spear that was an inferior divine weapon and shone with white light. With a move, Anderson darted into the shadows under his feet. Then, with an abrupt leap, he darted out from under Caesar's shadow. The shadow tooth in his hand pierced into Caesar's back with a series of spiraling forces. However, with a clang, a powerful force trembled throughout Anderson's armor. Anderson's attack was neutralized by the armor, which transmitted it to his entire body. Not only did his armor have the ability to disperse power, but his killing technique was also a killing technique that channeled power into the ground, guiding. Concurrently, the long spear in Caesar's hand flashed, thrusting out fiercely toward Anderson. Anderson let out a cold snort. Faced with this attack, he was unwilling to dodge. The shadow tooth in his hand burst out, clashing head-on with Caesar's long spear and forcing Caesar to retreat a step. The Empire's divine weapon armor that Caesar was wearing weighed 1 ton, and his body size was also over 2 times that of Anderson's. The 2-meter-long stun gun in his hand was also extremely powerful. To think that he was forced to retreat by a single move from Anderson, who was holding the shadow-tooth dagger. How high was Anderson's strength attribute? Therefore, Anderson completely demonstrated to everyone the dominating power of the Shadow Death God in terms of attributes. He stood before Caesar, and without even using his dagger, he just punched and hammered down on Caesar's armor, forcing Caesar to retreat another 3 steps. Seeing the long spear coming toward him, Anderson simply leaned his shoulder against it and rammed out like a mountain, sending the long spear flying. Caesar let out a furious roar. His fists, which were clad in armor, smashed over like meteor hammers. His feet and knees also cooperated. It was as if he had many hands and feet in an instant. He attacked Anderson in a frenzy. Facing Caesar's sudden attack, Anderson was even more ferocious and ruthless. He was using violence to counter violence, using toughness to counter toughness. His punches and kicks collided with Caesar's armor. His knee struck Caesar's knee like a comet crashing into the earth. Rows of airwaves accompanied the two of them, spraying out continuously from the point of impact. Caesar's set of armor, as well as his killing technique, Daoyin, were both effective means to neutralize forces. He was like a sponge, and no matter what kind of crazy attacks he was faced with, he would be as steady as Mount Tai. However, right now, Anderson wanted to defeat Caesar at his strongest point. He exchanged punches with punches, kicks, and arms with arms. His ferocious attacks managed to suppress Caesar. Finally, after 20 moves, Anderson let out a loud bellow and punched Caesar's chest. Caesar knelt down abruptly. Although Caesar's body was unharmed, he felt as if he had been run over by a big truck. All his muscles and tendons felt extremely sore, and he could no longer exert any strength. His body had been beaten up to the point where he had lost all his strength due to the tremendous pressure. Seeing that Caesar had knelt down on the ground, Anderson let out a cold snort and mercilessly kicked out Caesar, who weighed a ton, and sent him flying out of the arena. Looking at Anderson, who walked down the arena calmly without even panting, everyone seemed to once again feel the endless violence contained in his body. The Shadow Death God's attribute growth was truly the best among all the first transition jobs. He had not performed any killing technique and had already smashed Caesar, who was a metal can, into smithereens. The third match was between Wei Lung and Sire. This Sire was a skinny knight, rather than a knight. He looked more like an old farmer in the countryside. However, it was precisely this old farmer knight who had persisted until the top 8. Naturally, no one would look down on him. It was the same for Wei Lung. This man, who was a man of few words and who was as silent as a mountain, moved his limbs slightly the moment he stepped into the arena. An overwhelming aura burst forth from his entire body, as if a prehistoric ferocious beast had completely opened up its claws and fangs. He was an expert who had comprehended heaven's perception and had relied on it to reach this stage. Therefore, he naturally placed great importance on the cultivation of one's spirit. The instant his aura burst forth, it immediately caused Sire to feel a little terrified. Sire's gaze changed slightly as he stared at Wei Lung's body, showing great wariness. Wei Lung said calmly, "You're already afraid. You'll definitely lose this battle. Just surrender." Sire let out a cold laugh and did not say a word. The next moment, tens of silhouettes suddenly appeared behind him. They were not afterimages, but illusions that had physical bodies. Wei Lung shook his head, sighed, and said, "Why don't you think about your family? Why do you have to risk your life in a place like this?" Wei Lung's words were very simple, even crude. However, there was a strong and mysterious spiritual power in his voice. With just a few sentences, Sire once again felt as if his mind was shaken. Sire knew that he could no longer listen to Wei Lung's words. His body moved, and tens of illusionary silhouettes dashed out toward Wei Lung along with his real body. Wei Lung's long sword swept out, causing tens of illusionary silhouettes to explode. At the next moment, even more illusionary silhouettes dashed over. However, Wei Lung's longsword seemed to have formed many streams of electricity. No matter what kind of illusionary silhouettes got close to him, they would explode with a single swing of his sword. Wei Lung's strength was not strong, and neither was his speed fast. However, it was always just enough to kill the illusionary silhouettes. Sire looked at Wei Lung, who seemed to have entered an unstoppable state. He only felt that Wei Lung's longsword was getting increasingly faster, as if it was about to surpass the speed at which Sire could create illusions. From Sire's perspective, he was engaged in an intense battle with Wei Lung. However, from Wei Lung's and the audience's perspective, he was just standing there in a daze, not moving at all. He allowed Wei Lung to walk up to him and then, with a light push, sent Sire out of the arena. "What's going on?" "It's an illusory killing technique. It's amazing. I've never seen such a powerful illusory killing technique before." When did Sire fall into an illusion? Was it a conversation? Or did he fall into it the moment he stepped into the arena? The entire spectator stands buzzed with discussion. Wei Lung also walked off the arena, and it was only then that Sire returned to normal, as if he had just woken up from a dream. However, his eyes were still filled with a dazed look. The next round was the last round of the top 8. It was finally Holt's and Rhoda's turn. Looking at Rhoda, who was walking up the arena, Holt smiled and said, "It's not easy for a woman to be able to come this far. However, I saw that you managed to win the previous round by using psychological tricks. Then you should know that you're not my match. It's wiser for you to choose to give up in this round and conserve your abilities to fight for the 5,678th place." Rhoda shook her neck and moved her limbs, elbows, ankles, and wrists. Crisp, crackling sounds rang out all over her body, and her vital energy and blood seethed, releasing swooshing sounds. She displayed her powerful physical strength. As she warmed up, she said, "Tricks are just means. Advancing forward with indomitable will is the mentality of a knight." After being suppressed, in order to avoid getting seriously injured and affecting the subsequent battles, surrendering at this point in time is called decisiveness. Surrendering without firing a single spear or even stepping into the arena is called cowardice. You can't even differentiate between decisiveness and cowardice. It seems that although you've accumulated great physical strength, there are still many flaws in your mentality. Chapter 240. As a disciple of a divine-level expert, although Holt's performance in the regional selection over the past few days was slightly worse than Fang Xingjian's, he had still been brilliant and no one could underestimate him. In fact, after Fang Xingjian had killed Meng Hao with a single sword attack, he had become the only one who could compete with Fang Xingjian for the title of regional champion. Right now, Holt's aura was so strong that no one, other than Fang Xingjian, would be able to withstand it. Therefore, in order to weaken Holt's aura, Rhoda had chosen to engage in a verbal confrontation. However, after hearing Rhoda's words, Holt was not infuriated. He merely said calmly, "You have the heart of a knight who is fearless of challenges and moves forward courageously. You're also able to achieve your goals through unscrupulous means. You're truly a genius in battle. However, I'm not interested in sparring with you right now. My current interest is..." With that, he turned his head, his gaze fixed in Fang Xingjian's direction. Fang Xingjian seemed to not have noticed anything. His eyes were tightly shut, and he continued to cultivate his martial arts. Taking advantage of the moment, Holt turned his head. The long spear in Rhoda's hand left her hand. The void penetrative divine spear was activated, covering a distance of several tens of meters. With an extremely powerful piercing force, the twisting force struck Holt's face. "I've done it." Feeling the sensation in her hand, Rhoda was overjoyed. To think that he would be so careless, to think that he would be distracted in the arena battle. Just as these thoughts flashed through Rhoda's mind, she suddenly let out a stifled snort and retreated 7 steps before coming to a stop. However, the long spear in her hand was trembling nonstop. It was obvious that it had been rebounded by a huge force earlier. How is this possible? I've clearly struck his face. No matter how strong he is, it's impossible for him to use the surface of his reduced force field to block my stab. Rhoda looked at Holt's face, and the next moment, her pupils contracted. It was because she saw that his face, neck, and other parts of his body that were exposed were flashing with starlight. Under the sunlight, they were as beautiful as diamonds. "Astral Tempest?" Holt said calmly, "That's right. My skin is protected by a layer of Astral Tempest. With your strength and killing technique, it seems that there's no way for you to break through this layer of defense of mine. It's better for you to go down by yourself." Rhoda did not say anything, but his expression turned even more solemn. Holt looked at him and shook his head. Countless rays of silver light were emitted from his body, and the astral storm was activated. Seeing the countless flickering lights surrounding her, Rhoda suddenly took 3 steps back and lightly leaped out of the arena. Seeing Holt's surprised expression, Rhoda smiled and said, "I'm not a fool. Since I can't even break through your astral tempest, I naturally won't continue to pester you. I'll be waiting to see your battle with Fang Xingjian." With that, she gracefully exited the stage and left. Not only was she able to stand up under my immense pressure, she was also able to leave without being affected by her reputation in front of so many people. Holt smiled as he looked at Rhoda's back. What an interesting lady. At this point, the top 4 in the arena battle had finally been decided. They were Fang Xingjian, Anderson, Wei Lung, and Holt. After Fang Xingjian's recuperation and the time for the arena battle, 1 hour had finally passed, and he once again had the chance to use Terra ingurgitation. Next would be Fang Xingjian versus Anderson, and Wei Lung versus Holt. The victors of these 2 matches would then fight for the championship. Finally, it was time for the top 4, and the atmosphere became even more heated. The final 4 placings would affect the Academy's budget of several $100,000. Moreover, All the gambling stalls in the great western city were calculating crazily, and countless people were placing bets everywhere. This caused the bets for the regional selection in the entire great western city to reach over 1 million gold coins. With so much money added up, it was enough to affect the entire situation in the great western region. Moreover, the reward for the champion was a full set of level 29 superior divine weapon. Just one look at Holt's level 29 superior divine weapon, Crimson Fire. How powerful would a full set of level 29 superior divine weapon be? Countless passionate gazes looked at the four of them, mixed with various emotions. The top four had finally begun. However, just as Feng Xingjian was waiting for the battle to begin, a maid walked up to him and passed him a towel and water. However, when he scanned the tray with his heaven's perception, he was slightly stunned. There was a sentence written in ink on it. If you're willing to lose the next match, we're willing to offer you 30,000 gold. Although there was no thread in the words, 30,000 gold was a very heavy sum. Even for a conferred knight, it was a huge sum of money, not to mention not having to worry about food and drink. It could even be used to purchase a superior divine weapon. However, how could Feng Xingjian possibly care about him? How could 30,000 gold be compared to the reward for the regional champion? He ignored it and waited quietly for the competition to begin. Finally, the battle for the top four officially began. Anderson's silhouette flashed, and he rushed up to the arena impatiently, looking at Feng Xingjian with a battle intent. Compared to Anderson's speed, Feng Xingjian only arrived in the arena after a few flashes. Looking at Anderson and the surroundings, Feng Xingjian said calmly, "The environment here is not suitable for your battle style." How could Anderson possibly accept Feng Xingjian's kindness? He was the kind of person who would be stubborn even when facing death. He said directly, I'll just use 80% of my strength to deal with you guys." Feng Xingjian shook his head and said, "It'll be more interesting if I use 100% of my strength." Before Anderson could understand what Feng Xingjian meant, under his astonished gaze, Feng Xingjian casually took a few steps forward and suddenly stopped in front of a point. He then lifted his right leg lightly and stomped down fiercely at a speed as fast as a thunderbolt. With an explosive rumble, it was as if a shocking thunderbolt had descended from the sky. Violent dust and smoke soared up, and the entire arena instantly shattered into pieces, turning into countless shattered rocks that soared up into the sky. Anderson, who was in the distance, felt his heart palpitate. In that instant, he felt as if he was facing a natural disaster. Most of the arena structure had turned into huge rocks that were as tall as 1 or 2 people and a few meters long. They were like pieces of strange rocks that pierced into the sky. Feng Xingjian's foot landed on the arena's weak point, and the ferocious force was transmitted into the arena, exploding out. It was as if the entire world had been changed with a single stomp, turning the entire arena into a stone forest. With such a large area of stone forest, there were all sorts of shadows, blind spots, gaps between the rocks, and strange stone pillars. It was the Shadow Death God's favorite location for street battles and assassinations. It was only then that Feng Xingjian's voice rang out calmly. "With this, you'll be able to go all out. Go ahead and make your move. If I were to make my move first, you wouldn't have the chance to do so. It wasn't easy for you to come to the arena of the regional selection. You should at least display your battle prowess before you can go back with all your heart." Feng Xingjian's series of actions, the instantaneous kick and explosive power, as well as the exhaustion of his stamina and vital energy, were all to allow Anderson to go all out. Chapter 241. All right, I hope you won't regret this. Right now, Anderson was really holding his breath. He knew that it would be very, very difficult for him to defeat Feng Xingjian. However, since Feng Xingjian was being so arrogant, he might still stand a chance. "Even if I can't win you, I'll still give you a good beating so that you'll remember me." Anderson's figure flashed, and he hid in the shadows at the side. The Shadow Death God had the ability to turn into shadows and leap from shadows. Right now, The entire arena had been turned into a stone forest by Fong Xingjian's stomp. There were shadows everywhere, and it was perfect for him to unleash his abilities. In that instant, Anderson's silhouette merged into the darkness, completely disappearing. Meanwhile, the shadows in the stone forest started to sway and tremble incessantly, as if there were countless wild beasts hiding in the shadows, waiting to break out of their cages. However, Fong Xingjian was blind. Other than being able to see with his heaven's perception within a 10-meter radius, he was unable to sense the changes in the shadows beyond that range. However, there was no need for him to sense them. As long as the other party's attacks were within 10 meters of him, he would be the one in control of the other party's life and death. Right before this calm before the storm, 3 flying daggers shot out from the shadows behind Fong Xingjian. Each of the flying daggers tore through the air, releasing sharp whistling sounds as they broke through the speed of sound. These were all flying daggers that Anderson had thrown out with his bare hands. This was also the first time he had displayed his flying dagger skills in the regional selection. To think that he could make the flying daggers surpass the speed of sound just by throwing them with his bare hands. This skill alone would probably be able to wipe out a large number of knights. However, when used against Fong Xingjian, it was far from sufficient. Sword light flashed, and the 3 flying daggers were all fended off. However, this was only the beginning. After the 3 flying daggers were fended off, as Fong Xingjian's body turned, another 3 flying daggers shot out from the shadows behind him. Then another 3, countless flying daggers shot out from the shadows in all directions. The farthest ones were over 10 meters away, while the nearer ones were within 1 meter. Several tens of flying daggers shot out explosively at the same time, almost compressing every inch of space around Fong Xingjian. Try to distract me with flying daggers and then find an opportunity to attack? As Fong Xingjian's thoughts ran through his mind, the long sword in his hand did not stop. It was as if he was juggling, easily fending off all the flying daggers that had shot out from the shadows. However, just as he was fending off the last flying dagger, Anderson darted out from the shadows behind Fong Xingjian. All the power in his body was gathered on one spot. The killing technique, Sun Piercer, was activated. Together with Ing Ya's spiraling force, Anderson seemed to have turned into an extremely huge drill, piercing out toward Fong Xingjian. Fong Xingjian had to know. He had it. Fong Xingjian, V had. It was because Anderson's Shadow Death God's overall growth rate was the best amongst those who had gone through the first transition, and its strength attribute far surpassed that of Fong Xingjian's. Therefore, unless Fong Xingjian were to use Terra Ingurgitation or counter Anderson's attacks as they came, Fong Xingjian would not be able to receive Anderson's attacks head-on. However, the moment he retreated, he discovered a problem. It was because no matter how fast he retreated, Anderson would be able to catch up. It was because Anderson had come out from his shadow. As long as he retreated, his shadow would retreat as well. Anderson would be brought along with him. No matter how fast he retreated, it would be impossible for him to be faster than his shadow. Just as these thoughts flashed through Fong Xingjian's mind, the huge drill was already over 10 centimeters away from him. The turbulent air currents blew against his face and body, as if they were wind blades, wanting to cut through his skin and flesh. If I were to use Terra Ingurgitation, I'd naturally be able to crush Anderson easily. However, Fong Xingjian could only use Terra Ingurgitation once per hour. The next time he used it was to prepare for Holt. Therefore, he could only take it head-on or attack Anderson, causing both of them to be injured. When Anderson made his move this time around, Fong Xingjian had already taken this into consideration. He was putting his life on the line. Faced with Anderson, who was getting closer and closer, the long sword in Fong Xingjian's hand changed slightly, and spots of light started to be activated. The killing technique, Luminous Heaven Soaring Slash, was activated. Streams of light shot out from Fong Xingjian's longsword, changing the direction of the shadow. With a loud boom, the shadow was instantly elongated and shifted. Anderson, who was on top of the shadow, was shifted 6 meters away, knocking his head against a huge stone wall. Before Anderson's shadow teeth, the stone wall instantly shattered into pieces, as if it was easily torn apart like tofu. Anderson came to an abrupt halt, looking at the light flashing on Fang Xingjian's longsword. His expression was a little gloomy. Other than being able to move stealthily, the most powerful thing about transforming into shadows and leaping through them was that they were like maggots in one's bones. No matter what target they set their eyes on, it would be hard for the other party to escape. It was because shadows were formed from light that they could appear and disappear at the speed of light. No one could be faster than their own shadow. However, it was also because shadows were formed from light that Anderson hated to meet an opponent who could emit light the most. How troublesome. Before this, Fang Xingjian had never displayed sword arts that could emit light. At the next moment, streams of sword chi shot out. Anderson had already turned into a shadow, once again merging into the darkness. However, after seeing Anderson merge into the shadow, Fang Xingjian did not panic. He continued to sweep his longsword, slashing out streams of sword chis one after another. The streams of sword chis were like atmospheric dragons, circling around him incessantly. They even continued to spread out from the 10-meter radius to the entire arena. What is he trying to do? Ordinary sword chis shouldn't be able to hurt Anderson, who's in the shadows, right? Just as everyone was feeling puzzled, Fang Xingjian once again released streams of light from all over his body. He was just like the legendary gods, and every inch of his skin was covered by white light. The streams of light gushed into the sword chis, reflected and scattered. In that instant, streams of light filled up the entire arena. All of a sudden, only shadows existed within a 10-meter radius around Fang Xingjian. He had intentionally controlled the area. It was because he would not be able to see the shadows beyond a 10-meter radius, let alone control them. Anderson cursed inwardly. Be ****. I can't even make use of the shadows on my body now. There were shadows on a human's body as well. This was especially so when the other party swung their weapons. There were also shadows below their necks, armpits, and palms, which were caused by their body structure. These were all places that the Shadow Death God liked to make use of. If one were to stab out from the shadows below their armpits or the shadows below their necks, even if the other party was much stronger than them, they would still be seriously injured or even killed by a sneak attack. However, not only could Fang Xingjian's sword technique release light, it could also reflect light. It was the Shadow Death God's greatest nemesis. Concurrently, Fang Xingjian's voice rang out. Aren't you going to make your move? There should be a limit to the amount of time you can stay in the shadows, right? Anderson's eyes narrowed. At the next moment, the shadows on the arena started to spread out. It was as if a drop of ink had fallen into water, turning the entire arena into a stretch of pure black. Chapter 242. Anderson activated his skill, Shadow Coffin. In an instant, shadows that seemed to have come to life encompassed the entire arena and even headed toward Fang Xingjian's body. These shadows that had come to life did not seem to be mere shadows, but some kind of strange energy. Even the light that Fang Xingjian's body kept on releasing was unable to expel these shadows. Moreover, as the entire arena was encompassed, it was almost impossible to dodge the shadows. Not only did the Shadow Coffin have the special effect of weakening physical structures, but the 5 senses of those who were encompassed by it would also be cut off, as if they were really a dead person sleeping in a coffin. This was a secret that only Anderson knew at the moment. Just as he used the Shadow Coffin to encompass Fang Xingjian, Anderson shot out from the shadows, thrusting a black sheet in his hand toward Fang Xingjian. The sheet in his hand was very strange. It looked like a large piece of shadow surrounding his palm. However, this piece of shadow formed the shape of a blade, drifting in the air as Anderson thrust it toward Fang Xingjian with great force. The trapping skill was still the Shadow Coffin, while the killing skill was called Death God's Dagger. This was the Shadow Death God's ultimate technique. It would send the opponent into a coffin made of shadows, and then use the Death God's dagger to take away the opponent's life. In the Legends of Miracle World, the Death God slept in a coffin formed by shadows. Each time he woke up, he would use a dagger to take away the opponent's life. Anderson's job as the Shadow Death God seemed to have inherited this legend. The shadow coffin weakened the opponent and cut off their 5 senses. The Death God's dagger was a piece of shadow. It had no thickness or physical form, yet could cut through everything. With the two combined, it was almost certain death. From a moment Anderson activated the shadow coffin to the moment he performed the Death God's dagger and stabbed toward Feng Xingjian, his expression was solemn and his movements heavy. It was as if he was not killing, but holding a mysterious sacrifice. Each of his actions and each step he took contained a mysterious aura. It was as if he wanted to send Feng Xingjian into eternal darkness, offering him up as a sacrifice to the legendary Death God. A crisp sound rang out, and the Death God's dagger gently stabbed into the shadow coffin. It then penetrated through the entire shadow coffin without any obstruction. It looked like a magic show where a living person was slammed into a box and then cut open. After one hit, the entire shadow coffin turned into fragments that filled the sky and drifted between heaven and earth. At this moment, the living shadows on the ground also began to retreat. Obviously, Anderson couldn't maintain that kind of shadow that defied common sense for a long time. However, after the shadow fragments filled the sky, there was nothing. Feng Xingjian's body was nowhere to be seen. Anderson's heart skipped a beat. In the next moment, he felt a huge force coming from the back of his waist. Caught off guard, the violent force was completely absorbed by him. It traveled from his waist to every corner of his body, turning into a wave of intense pain. At the same time, he was sent flying. Only then did Anderson notice that he was too close to the edge of the arena. Although he was kicked a few meters away, he twisted his waist, turned around, and tried to find a way to stop his body on the ground. But when he landed, he was already out of the arena. Anderson lifted his head abruptly and looked at Feng Xingjian, who was slowly withdrawing his leg. He shouted, "It's light? You're not only using light to suppress my shadows, but also to force me to use my ultimate move. At the same time, you're also changing the light to interfere with my vision, creating a mirage?" Feng Xingjian kept his long sword and slowly walked down the arena. Anderson shouted, "Is it or isn't it? Answer me." Feng Xingjian did not stop in his tracks. He merely said calmly, "You're too reliant on your eyes." Hearing that, Anderson suddenly touched his eyes. It was true that as a knight who needed to control shadows and assassinate his enemies from the shadows, he was too concerned with the changes between light and shadows. He was also too trusting in the information his eyes gave him. Anderson glared at Feng Xingjian's departing back, but he did not say anything more. He just turned and left. On the spectator's stands, Ferdinand waved his hand fiercely. This time around, as long as Feng Xingjian defeated Holt, he would be able to become the regional champion. In addition to the bets from the rankings in the previous stages, he would be able to earn at least 2,000 gold. Treja clan's Forbidden Army commander, Adri, looked at the victorious Feng Xingjian and said coldly, although he seems to be pretending to be magnanimous, as if he wants to defeat Anderson in all aspects and even give him a good battle environment, he's still using light. He doesn't want to give his opponent the chance to unleash his full power. This is because he still wants to conserve his energy and stamina to deal with Holt. Seems like he doesn't have much confidence in defeating Holt. That's why he wants to conserve his energy and increase his chances of winning. Xiaoyi asked, "Sir, between Feng Xingjian and Holt, who do you think will win?" The sword attack Feng Xingjian used to defeat Meng Hao was very powerful. If Holt's Astral Tempest is paired with a level 29 divine weapon, it will also be very powerful. Let's see who makes a mistake first and gets seriously injured first. Saying this, he smiled. If Feng Xingjian gets seriously injured, it'll be very beneficial for my next operation. On the contrary, if he were to seriously injure Holt or even kill him, he'll have formed a feud with the astral ancestors' Myriad Stars Palace. That'll be even better. On the other side, Wei Lung and Holt had already entered the arena. The assistant examiner asked them if they needed to clean up the arena and renovate it. Both of them shook their heads. Looking at Wei Lung, Holt shook his head. Streams of silver light soared up into the sky, and the astral tempest wreaked havoc in the entire arena. It was like many nebulas in the universe, surrounding Wei Lung entirely. Holt did not take Wei Lung seriously at all. Compared to those knights who were still fighting with their fists, kicks, and moves, his astral tempest was already like a second transition knight's. It was a competition of pure, extraordinary strength. Although Wei Lung had attained heaven's perception, it could not change the fact that his foundation over the past few decades was too weak. Even if he had attained heaven's perception, it would still take him several years, or even over 10 years of hard work to catch up to him. Right now, Wei Lung had a great advantage in terms of moves. With the insight of heaven's perception, he could even bring forth new ideas in his illusory sword technique, greatly increasing its effects. However, before absolute power, all these were meaningless. Holt's right hand slowly clenched into a fist, and countless streams of stars condensed and transformed, turning into a fist that was the size of half the arena. One move. Wei Lung, if you can take this move of mine, it'll be your win. As he spoke, Holt pushed his palm out and pressed down across space. At the same time, the huge astral palm that had gathered in midair also slapped down. Wei Lung only felt that the sky had turned dark. As Holt's palm slapped down, it was as if the entire sky in his vision had disappeared. Chapter 243. Holt's words were like a huge vat smashing on the ground, allowing the audience in the arena to hear it clearly. Then he smashed his palm down. The gigantic palm, formed by the Milky Way, was half the size of the arena. Every thumb was sculpted to the finest detail, giving off a feeling of activity and life. It was as if it was really the palm of a giant. One should not think that this was just superficial work. Such details showed Holt's control over the astral storm. It was as if every speck of starlight was under his control, and every trace of power was completely grasped by him. That was why he was able to unleash all his power in an instant and unleash such a terrifying palm strike. Previously, Holt had displayed his skills and experience. However, this palm strike completely displayed his strength that could dominate the night level. As the naked power came crashing down, the surging air currents let out popping sounds. It was as if all the air was being forcefully compressed out. Wei Lung even felt a little suffocated, as if he couldn't breathe. Holt's palm strike was like the collapse of the heavens and the earth. The violent airflow made it impossible for him to dodge. He could only block it head-on. In an instant, Wei Lung let out a maniacal roar, finally displaying the strength that he had been concealing all this while. A speck of starlight spilled out from the tip of his sword, as if a star had lit up in the boundless darkness. This was the new killing technique he had learned after comprehending the third level of the Pantheon Monument's profoundness, Dark Venus. This killing technique was one that the melancholic monarch had created in order to restore the starry sky. That was right. Back then, in order to attain a breakthrough above the divine level, the melancholic monarch had the idea of creating an artificial star and reorganizing the starry sky. The dark morning star was a killing technique he had created for the purpose of shooting stars into the sky. To launch an artificial star from the earth and fly it into the distant starry sky, how enormous and terrifying the power needed to do this. One could imagine how ferocious this move of Dark Venus was. On the basis of exchanging information with ether particles, Fang Xingjian went a step further in exchanging energy, creating an explosive chain reaction. It was an extremely violent power. If it could be said that Holt's palm strike had instantly caused the world to darken, as if the sky had collapsed, then Wei Lung's Dark Venus star would be like a flickering light in the darkness, wanting to pierce through the heavens and escape from the world. The two moves were both extremely violent. The moment the tip of the sword and the giant palm came into contact, the entire world seemed to fall silent for a moment. Wei Lung felt as if he had completely lost control of his body, flying out like he was riding on a cloud. He had a feeling as if the universe had shattered and his soul had flown out. It was as if Holt's palm had sent his soul flying out of his body. His feet kept stomping and stomping, trying to stop his body, but other than creating a series of craters and sending large pieces of gravel flying, there was no effect at all. His whole body was forcefully pushed out of the arena. Everywhere he passed by, he left behind countless potholes. When he opened his eyes with great difficulty and looked toward the arena, he discovered that the entire arena had been flattened by Holt's palm. In the previous round, Fang Xingjian's stomp had followed the weakness of the arena's structure, using an ingenious force to cause the interior of the arena to explode, creating a stone forest with a single stomp. Then Holt's palm had used pure brute force to crush the entire stone forest, returning the arena to its original state. It had even suppressed the arena even more tightly. Wei Lung smiled bitterly and said, "I can't even take a single move? Isn't it just a move that he wholeheartedly attacked me with?" With a sigh, he sheathed his sword. However, he discovered that his long sword had shattered into pieces, leaving behind only a bare sword hilt. He shook his head and went down. Finally, the two candidates for the final round of the regional selection had appeared. Holt stood with his hands behind his back, with the Milky Way still revolving around him. He was like the king of the gods, the ruler of all the stars. He stood in the center of the arena, looking down at Fang Xingjian. "Xingjian, I've just warmed up. Let's not bother about resting time, and just start." Fang Xingjian naturally had no objections. He took a step forward, and in the next moment, he appeared in the arena at lightning speed. At this point in the regional selection, it was finally time for the final battle. The reshuffling of over 1,000,000 gold coins, superior divine weapons, countless academies, and clans had finally reached this moment. Treja Clanshio, he could not help but say, "Amazing. This Holt is really amazing. Regardless of whether it's his strength, techniques, divine weapon, realm, or killing technique, he's simply perfect. He's already standing at the pinnacle of the knight level. All right, let's stop talking. Let's take a good look at the ending of this round. In terms of the knight level, there aren't many who are stronger than the two of them since ancient times. The one who spoke was the Forbidden Army's deputy commander, Adri. Right now, his attention was also attracted by the battle between Fang Xingjian and Holt. The two of them had fought their way up, each of them displaying their domineering knight prowess, which far surpassed that of a first transition knight. Ker's City Lord sighed and said, "Since ancient times, even those divine-level experts of the past, at their age when they were knights, there are probably less than 10 people who are stronger than Fang Xingjian and Holt. At their level, it's already the limit for knights. The pinnacle of knights, the pinnacle of the first transition, the great battle that would decide who would be the #1 knight in the Great Western region, as well as the distribution of countless riches and resources, was about to begin. Even conferred knights like Ker's City Lord could not help but be attracted by it. It was because knights like Fang Xingjian and Holt would probably not appear in the next few decades, or even centuries. It was too rare and exciting. Even David and his father, Mongol City Lord, could not help but feel slightly agitated. They looked at the two people in the arena without blinking, as if worried that they would miss out on any exciting scenes. At the examiner's seat, the old and clumsy Luke stroked his beard and said, "This battle is really a fierce one. His Majesty's move has really forced out all the outstanding talents in the world. Between Fang Xingjian and Holt, who do you think will win?" Logically speaking, it should be Fang Xingjian. His speed far surpasses Holt's, and he can advance and retreat at will. If he can unleash that sword attack which defeated Meng Hao once again, his chances of winning will be over 60%. The one who spoke was Governor Devitt. However, Holt has yet to reveal the martial arts he comprehended from the Pantheon Monument. Moreover, he's the grand disciple of a divine-level expert. Once Fang Xingjian shows mercy and is worried about offending a divine-level expert, the outcome of the battle will probably change. It was true. In a battle between two people, one's reputation and background were also a part of one's abilities. A strong reputation and background could cause one's opponent's hands and feet to be tied up to the extent that they would only be able to unleash 70% to 80% of their powers. Just then, the atmosphere in the arena seemed to have reached an extremely stifling point. However, Holt opened his mouth to speak. His words seemed to have descended from the Milky Way beyond the 9 heavens, like a divine decree from the gods. Xinjiang, it's finally our turn to fight. Chapter 244. Hearing Holt's words, Fang Xinjiang said calmly, "Although there are many participants in this year's regional selection, you're the only one who can make me go all out." Holt laughed and said, "That's right. Then let's cut the crap and let everyone see what a true genius is, what a true top-notch knight is." After saying this, it was as if a strong gust of wind was stirred up in the arena. It was the air currents formed by the rapid surging of the astral tempest. However, the one who made the first move was not Holt. Countless astral rivers flashed before Holt, and only then did Fang Xinjiang's longsword stop abruptly before him. It was only after a long time that there was a loud rumbling sound. The majestic force blew away all the surrounding astral rivers. Amidst the loud rumbling sound, there were sounds of metal clashing, air exploding, and the vibrations of vital energy, blood, and bones. The terrifying sound waves crashed out in all directions. Some of the aristocrats with weaker attributes, who were not even knights, felt dizzy, their chests tightened, and they felt short of breath, as if they would faint at any moment. In the next moment, countless Fang Xinjiang silhouettes flashed crazily around Holt. The many astral rivers were like many huge pythons, continuously using their bodies to fend off Fang Xinjiang's attacks. Each sword slash would cause a large area of astral rivers to explode and scatter. However, very quickly, even more astral rivers would gather. Faced with Fang Xinjiang, who was in the state of boundaries negation, Holt was actually able to use the number of astral rivers to go against his speed. Fang Xinjiang was like a series of black lightning, continuously slashing out slashes around Holt. The sounds and actions of the entire battle were slightly delayed. This was because Fang Xinjiang's speed had reached 10 times at a supersonic speed, causing all the spectators to feel an indescribable discomfort. Due to the high-speed friction in the air, the sound produced was like the howls of a banshee. All the spectators who were below the level of knights had no choice but to retreat. If they were to continue staying, they would probably be killed by the repercussions of this battle. At this point in time, the weak did not even have the right to spectate. Surrounded by the river of stars, Holt stood still with his arms crossed. His eyes kept moving, trying to capture Fang Xinjiang's figure at all times. However, Fang Xinjiang's speed was simply too fast. Almost every time he came into contact with the astral tempest, he would immediately retreat. It was as if he was not affected by the force at all. He kept lashing out at the astral tempest with the sword cheese produced by slicing through the air at high speed. The high temperature caused Fang Xinjiang's body to emit a faint red glow. White steam kept rising from his body. Another explosive rumble rang out, and over 100 streams of sword cheese mixed with over 100 streams of ether sword ripples tore through the astral tempest. Fang Xinjiang's sword slashed on Holt's body, but with a loud clang, Holt took 3 steps back. Apart from the streaks of starlight on his face, he was unscathed. The surface of his body was encompassed by the river of stars. It was as if he was wearing the armor of a level 19 inferior divine weapon. When Fang Xinjiang's sword slashed out, the rebounding force continued to attack him, causing his body to pause for a moment. Then his silhouette was drowned by the river of stars. However, it was only for an instant. In the next instant, a total of 10 streams of ether sword ripples slashed out at 10 times the speed of sound, bringing along a series of sparks. They broke through the river of stars that encompassed him. Fang Xinjiang darted out abruptly, arriving at the edge of the arena. He lowered his body like a cheetah, and the long sword in his hand continued to emit high temperatures. White steam kept rising from his body, as if he had just come out from a steamer. Holt touched his cheek, which had just been slashed by a sword, smiled, and said, "Although your speed is fast, under the absolute number of astral tempest, it's still weak. They exist like air. No matter how fast you are or how agile you are, it's impossible for you to avoid air." Faced with Holt's words, Feng Xinjian smiled coldly. "Can air block out sunlight?" Before Holt could react, Feng Xinjian's body flashed and disappeared once again. This time around, he did not dash toward Holt's body. Instead, he was like a satellite, flying and circling around Holt within a 10-meter radius. Simultaneously, as he continued to circle around Holt at high speed, streams of white sword cheese circled around the long sword in his hand, reflecting streams of light. Luminous Heaven Soaring Slash was activated. Reflecting sword light and sunlight, the light sword, which had a high temperature of 1,000 degrees Celsius, struck Holt's face. Holt let out a stifled snort and retreated a step while covering his face. Clearly, the astral tempest was not able to completely insulate him from heat. He raised his hand, and the outer astral tempest had already blocked off the light. However, how fast was Feng Xinjian's speed? He kept on flashing around Holt, and the speed at which the light sword arrived was instantaneous. At almost every moment, there would be light swords piercing through the gaps in the astral tempest, circling around various parts of Holt's body to increase the temperature. Holt put his palms together, and the endless astral tempest wrapped him up into a sphere. It was as if he was a precious pearl that contained the endless universe, emitting starry light. Looking at this obvious target, Feng Xinjian stopped in his tracks. The clothes on his upper body had already been shredded by the high-speed air currents. He casually tore off his tattered night attire and looked at the sphere, deep in thought. He was wondering if he should make use of this opportunity to use terra ingurgitation. He could only use terra ingurgitation once in this battle. Of course, he would have to find the best and most fatal opportunity. Just as he was thinking of this, Holt's voice rang out in the air, accompanied by the tremors from his sphere. "Very good. Feng Xinjian, as expected of my greatest opponent in the regional selection this time around. If it's you, I can finally perform Crimson Fire at full power." At the next moment, streams of crimson flames extended out from the sphere. If the sphere formed by the astral tempest looked like an egg, then the incessant streams of flames were like something breaking out of the egg. This was a killing technique, Serpent of Engulfment, which the astral ancestor had specially created for the level 29 superior divine weapon Crimson Fire and the killing technique Astral Tempest. A huge serpent that seemed to be formed from lava darted out from the Astral Tempest egg. According to the ancient legends, the world had originally been in a state of chaos. When the world creation serpent broke out from the chaos, the entire world started to be created. However, one day, the Serpent of Engulfment would once again engulf the entire world, and the world would welcome its end. This killing technique, Serpent of Engulfment, which the astral ancestor had created, was clearly based on the legend of world creation. In the huge egg formed by the astral tempest, the huge serpent was born. With the appearance of the huge serpent, the surrounding heat continued to be absorbed by the huge serpent, and its lava-like body grew increasingly brighter and brighter. This was a huge serpent that continued to absorb heat until everything in the world was destroyed. It was like the legendary world creation Serpent of Engulfment, which would eventually engulf the entire world. Seeing this killing technique, Serpent of Engulfment, being performed by Holt, the 4 examiners present all stood up. Chapter 245. This move, the Snake of Engulfment, seemed to have the intent to destroy the world and to engulf everything in the world. Although Holt was still a little immature when he performed it and was not able to hurt the 4 examiners, what kind of judgment did they have? Looking at the charm of this move, his eyes were filled with a trace of soul-stirring emotion. "What a guy!" Luke, who was the oldest amongst the 4 examiners, exclaimed, "This move is amazing, really amazing." It has the concept of the vastness of the starry sky and the only thing in chaos, as well as the intent of extermination of all living things and the exchange of ether, as well as the principles of sorcery and divine arts. Amazing, really amazing. Governor Devitt's eyes also narrowed as he stared at the snake of engulfment, which was shaking its head incessantly and slowly being born from the astral river. He mumbled, "Looking at this snake, one can see how rare it is for the astral ancestor to have cultivated for so many years. It seems that he still holds a grudge against the ranking 30 years ago." Armstrong also stood and looked at the arena, saying, "None of the 10 divine level experts are wasting their time. Let's also prepare to make our moves at any moment. Otherwise, if they were to continue fighting like this, half of the people in the battle coliseum will probably die." Although all the spectators who were below knight level had left the arena, most of them were still knights. Looking at the snake of engulfment's current stance, it was clear that the repercussions from the battle between the two of them were not something that ordinary knights would be able to fend off. In the arena, the snake of engulfment, which had finally drilled its entire body out, opened its mouth and let out roars that rang through the entire regional academy. With the snake of engulfment as the center, the temperature continued to drop at a speed that could be discerned by the naked eye. Frost had started to form on the arena. On the other hand, although the snake of engulfment's main body was getting increasingly brighter as it continued to absorb heat, its surface was actually very cold. This was a very strange feeling of contradiction. It was as if something that looked very hot was getting colder and colder. With a roar, the snake of engulfment looked at Feng Xingjian and said, "Xingjian, although this move, the snake of engulfment, can only be cultivated by conferred knights, and I'm currently only at the first level, it's still not something that ordinary knights can fend off. But I can't use this move for too long. You can't use the move you used to kill Meng too many times, right? Our earlier exchange was a draw. It's clear that our techniques, battle prowess, and killing techniques are very similar. There's no point in continuing to be entangled like this. Why don't we both unleash our full powers and decide the victor with a single move?" He had clearly performed the astral projection killing technique on the serpent of engulfment. Just like that, his entire physical body was wrapped up and protected by the galaxy tempest, while his consciousness entered the snake of devouring to fight. As for what he said, Feng Xingjian agreed with him. If this continued, even if he could delay the other party until the end of the snake of engulfment, the other party would still be able to use the astral tempest to fly, defend, and astral projection to delay him. Feng Xingjian even guessed that the other party probably had an astral tempest and astral projection to disguise the body formed by the astral tempest as his real body. Moreover, the most important thing was that Feng Xingjian's boundaries negation also had a time limit. The longer the other party's snake of engulfment lasted, the greater the damage it would cause to the arena and the surroundings. Therefore, hearing Holt's words, Feng Xingjian nodded and said, "It's true that there's no point in continuing to be entangled like this. Since that's the case, let's decide the victor with a single move. Take this sword attack from me." After saying this, Feng Xingjian slowly raised the sticks in his hand. Streams of sharp aura gushed forth, and streams of ether sword ripples were attached to the sticks. This was the usage of the ether sword ripples that Feng Xingjian had recently come up with. As streams of sword ripples covered the body of his sword, streams of extremely sharp aura started to circulate on his body. With his body as the center, cracks started to appear on the arena. There were all sorts of cracks, but all of them seemed to have been slashed by a long sword. An explosive rumble rang out in the sky. It was unknown if it was a coincidence or something else, but a huge hole appeared in the clouds. It was as if a long sword had soared up into the sky, tearing the clouds apart. Just as the two of them were conversing, Devitt and the other 3 examiners nodded to each other and went to a corner of the arena. Devitt moved his palm, and over 100 ice dragons encompassed the entire arena. Then the 3 examiners each placed their hands on the ice dragons, and the ice dragons turned into a faint layer of fog, absorbing the powers of the 4 examiners and encompassing the entire arena. Seeing the four examiners' solemn actions, all the spectators present became nervous. Even the spectators in the front rows started to retreat under the protection of their subordinates. Other than a few conferred knights, all the other spectators who were at the level of knights had retreated to the outermost area of the battle coliseum, carefully watching the environment in the arena. Simultaneously, over 400 streams of ether sword ripples covered the body of Fang Xingjian's sword. Then, the level 4 ether effulgence weapon was activated, and it was as if even the sword ripples were trembling. If the 400 streams of sword ripples represented 1,000 times of Fang Xingjian's powers, and when they were mixed with the effulgence weapon, then when Fang Xingjian performed the terra ingurgitation once again, the world would change. It would far surpass the powers that a human's body of flesh and blood could attain. Experiencing weightlessness for the second time, everyone felt even more deeply how terrifying this power was. The whole world seemed to have been turned upside down at that moment. Everyone felt as if their lives were no longer in their control. They felt as if they could no longer control their own lives. An unknown amount of powerful powers had been mixed into this sword attack by Fang Xingjian. When Fang Xingjian's sword pierced out toward Fang Xingjian, no one paid any attention to the air ripples, air currents explosions, or sound waves. It was because at this moment, 99% of the people in the battle coliseum only felt that their vision had turned black and their ears had gone deaf. They could neither hear nor see anything. It was as if the world had really collapsed. This was a sword attack that was so strong that it could take away one's 5 senses, causing the weaker ones to subconsciously protect themselves, forgetting about time and space. Faced with Fang Xingjian's sword attack, the snake of engulfment, which was under Holt's control, shone extremely brightly in that instant. However, absolute light brought about absolute darkness. The moment the snake of engulfment shone extremely brightly was also the moment when it was crazily absorbing heat. The entire snake of engulfment brought along a state of withering all living things and extinguishing all life as it charged out toward Fang Xingjian. Wherever it passed by, the arena was completely frozen, and even the air was in a state of dead silence. Everything that encountered the snake of engulfment sank into eternal darkness and silence. Chapter 246. The moment the long sword in Fang Xingjian's hand neared the snake of engulfment, he sensed that something was wrong. It was because his entire body started to feel cold, and his heat energy was being absorbed incessantly. When his sword pierced into the snake of engulfment, this feeling became even more obvious. Even his speed started to slow down. However, the powers of terra ingurgitation were far too violent. Even though the snake of engulfment continued to absorb the heat energy from Fang Xingjian's body, the silver fox sticks was still able to tear apart the entire snake of engulfment within 1,000th of a second. Then, the sword tapped on the huge egg formed from the astral tempest. Waves caused by the tremors of the powers kept appearing on the surface of the astral tempest. In the end, it was as if a huge egg of chaos had been broken open, and the entire astral tempest exploded from this sword attack. The silver fox sticks in Fang Xingjian's hand also tore apart the astral tempest mercilessly, piercing out toward Holt. However, the long sword in Fang Xingjian's hand seemed to have reached its limits as well. After transmitting the powers of terra ingurgitation twice and slashing the snake of engulfment and the astral tempest, just as the long sword in Fang Xingjian's hand was about to tear apart Holt's body, it shattered inch by inch and became completely useless. Despite this, the remaining powers of terra ingurgitation exploded, sending Holt flying across space. With a loud bang, Holt crashed into the ice fog that the four examiners had jointly created and came to a stop. With this final wave of power, the entire battle coliseum finally stopped trembling. Thankfully, the four examiners had taken action in advance, and most of the repercussions from this final attack were fended off by them. There were only many cracks on the walls of the battle coliseum, and some nights students fell to the ground from the tremors. Thankfully, most of them were uninjured. The arena, which was encompassed by the ice fog, had turned into dust, and there was frost everywhere. Half of Fong, Xinjiang's body, kept on turning numb. He had suffered from severe frostbite. Even his internal organs and blood vessels were starting to deteriorate due to the loss of a large amount of heat. Fong Xinjiang immediately sat down on the ground and started to heal himself. He slowly exercised his body to generate heat and heal his wounds. Holt spat out a mouthful of blood and laughed out loud. I didn't expect you to be more skillful. I still lost despite relying on Scarlet Fire. If your sticks didn't shatter at the last moment, I would already be dead. Fong Xinjiang said coldly, You have the Galaxy Tempest to protect you. Even if my Netherworld River doesn't break, it will at most heavily injure you. It won't be able to kill you. After that, the two of them stopped talking and sat cross-legged on the spot, each beginning to heal their own injuries. The four examiners released an icy mist and looked at Fong Xinjiang, who was sitting on the stage, and Holt, who was sitting below the stage. The outcome of the battle could not be any clearer. Moreover, they had witnessed the entire battle just now. How is it? Did Holt lose? Or did Fong Xinjiang lose? Whispers could be heard from the audience. That last move was too fast and too powerful. 99% of the audience didn't even see it clearly, so they didn't know what was going on. Everyone's gazes were fixed in the direction of the arena, looking forward to the final outcome of this battle. Governor Devitt was stunned for a moment. At the next moment, all the words he wanted to say turned into a single sentence. He said, Then I announced that the winner of this year's regional champion is Cursed Academy's Fong Xinjiang. The Battle Coliseum fell silent for a moment, and then a loud boom erupted in the next moment. Countless people stood up, cheering, cursing, and bellowing, as if they were celebrating the birth of this year's regional champion. Fong Xinjiang exhaled and thought to himself, I finally won. At this moment, his physical strength was almost completely depleted. He was unable to release Terra Ingurgitation and Ether Sword Ripples, and even his accompanying sword, Styx, had been rendered useless after only holding it for a few days. However, all of this was worth it. The regional champion would win him a lot of time. On the spectator's stand, Ferdinand cheered and jumped up. His face was filled with ecstasy as he hugged Cursed City Lord, Anthony, and Robert. I've won. I've won. Ha ha. Thinking of the gold coins he was about to get his hands on, he could not help but laugh foolishly. Anthony and Robert, on the other hand, were smiling bitterly. They could have won 1,000 or 2,000 gold coins, but because of their hesitation, it had turned into a few hundred gold coins. In that instant, they felt an extreme pain in their hearts. Mongol City Lord took a long look at Fong Xinjiang, who was sitting cross-legged on the arena. He shook his head and was about to leave with his son, David. Treja Clan's Forbidden Army's deputy commander, Adri, looked at Fong Xinjiang. His eyes seemed to be filled with countless schemes and schemes. At the next moment, someone started clapping, and all the spectators in the Battle Coliseum started clapping as well. Amidst the tide-like applause, Manny and Rhoda walked up to the arena and helped Fong Xinjiang down. There were still the battles for the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and so on. However, most of the people present were probably not in the mood to watch them. Devitt and the 3 examiners walked up as well. They looked at Fong Xinjiang and said, Go and have a good rest. You don't have to worry about the rest of the competition. Fong Xinjiang nodded and was about to be helped up by a few maids to leave the Battle Coliseum. However, just then, the sky suddenly turned dark and a black fog encompassed the entire Battle Coliseum in the blink of an eye. It was as if a layer of darkness had covered the sky, blocking out the sunlight. A conferred knight, who was dressed in black armor and whose head was completely covered by a black helmet, had appeared in the sky above the Battle Coliseum. Looking at everyone's gazes, he said calmly, Seems like I'm not too late. The Great Western Region's regional selections, first place has just been decided, right? Devitt's gaze turned cold as he said, Dark Knight? Then the first prince is here as well, right? Haha, that's right. A similarly pitch-black fog appeared behind the dark night, forming a pitch-black human figure. However, when Feng Xingjian saw this figure, he was slightly stunned. It was the first prince, George Krieg. The 36 contract and the Hell's map would each have 36 clones attached to them. They represented the 36 powers which the ancient path of Hell believed Hell should possess. Previously, the first prince had appeared in flames. This time around, he had appeared in darkness. The first prince, who was formed from the black fog, was filled with a mysterious and despairing aura. It was as if there were shrill cries constantly ringing out, and many pained faces were trying to emerge from his body. He threw a glance at the people under his feet. It was as if he was the god in the heavens announcing his decree. Each of his words seemed to be ringing out in everyone's hearts, bringing about a terrifying aura. He was merely standing in the sky, but it was as if he was the ruler of the entire world. Waves of powerful aura came gushing down, as if wanting everyone to prostrate themselves in worship and have thoughts of surrendering. Feng Xingjian thought to himself, so powerful. This clone is much stronger than the flame clone from last time. The first prince said calmly, "Father has already agreed to my request and appointed me as this year's royal supervisory officer to oversee the situation in this year's regional selections in the 8 regions. I'll also be able to select the elites and give them special approval to enter the National Royal Academy to study, increasing the power of the royal family. The reason I've come to the Great Western region today is to select the elites from the top 10 to follow me back to the imperial capital." The first prince's words caused the entire battle coliseum to break into an uproar. The countenances of Devitt and the other examiners changed as they looked at the dark night and the first prince in the sky with unfriendly expressions. Chapter 247. Hearing the first prince's words, regardless of whether it was the 4 examiners or the examinees present, all felt their hearts skip a beat and their expressions turned grim. Looking at the first prince who was like a god or a demon in the sky, everyone present felt a suffocating feeling. All sorts of feelings of nervousness, terror, excitement, and even admiration permeated the air, causing everyone present to feel suffocated. For the past few years, the first prince had been overbearing and tyrannical, taking in all sorts of geniuses without restraint. He had even wiped out a few factions and killed many high-ranking officials in the empire, causing the entire empire's upper echelon to be on tenterhooks. Moreover, the first prince was already the future successor of the empire. With his influence, he had already become an existence second only to the king in the empire. Everyone was clear about the first prince's goal. He wanted to cultivate the 36 Hells maps to an unprecedented level of perfection. What kind of level was that? It was an unparalleled martial art that required all 36 Hells maps contractors to be level 29 conferred knights. 36 knights at the pinnacle of the second transition. What kind of power was that? There were only over 5,000 conferred knights in the entire empire, and among them, there were no more than 100 who could reach level 29. If the first prince wanted to gather 36 conferred knights at the pinnacle, it would mean that he wanted to gather 1/3 or more of the top experts in the entire empire. How is that possible? Behind each level 29 conferred knight was an unbelievably powerful influence, representing various factions, groups, and political organizations. It was just like the 8 governors from the 8 regions. How could they be easily subdued by the first prince, signed with the Hell's maps, and then be completely controlled by the first prince? Therefore, the first prince's main goal was to gather geniuses who had the potential to reach level 29. Even so, it was still very difficult. At the very least, ever since the ancient path of Hell was established, only the legendary founder, Adam, had succeeded. Anyone who knew the first prince's motive would be shocked by his generosity. However, what came after the astonishment was even more intense pressure. It was because if the first prince really succeeded, there would probably no longer be any other influences, groups, or factions in the entire empire. The entire world would be under the first prince's control. Moreover, As the first prince made his appearance and spoke, everyone present felt an aura that could suppress the heavens and earth sweeping toward them in an overwhelming manner. The abilities of each of the 36 Hell's clones were closely related to their contractor. For example, the Dark Knight in the sky had the pinnacle of second transition, level 29's power. This caused the first prince's clone's aura to be even more profound. Just its appearance alone was enough to suppress everyone present to the point where they could not even raise their heads. It displayed a peerlessly domineering power. Everyone gasped in astonishment. If the first prince really managed to cultivate all 36 layers of the Hell's maps, then what kind of world-shaking power would he have when all 36 clones and his real body were gathered together? However, no matter what, 99% of the examinees in the examination hall did not want to be taken in by the first prince and become his puppet. Governor Devitt was the first to step out. Looking at the first prince in the sky, he said with an unfriendly expression, "Prince George, I don't think I've heard anything about the royal supervising inspector that you mentioned." "Of course not." George Krieg smiled. "It's because Father finally agreed to it 3 days ago. Therefore, I rushed to the regional selections venue without stopping. The Great Western region is already my 3rd stop." Devitt's brows furrowed tightly, and he said without giving any face, "Do you have proof?" George Krieg let out a cold laugh. He did not seem to mind that Governor Ruby did not give any face. After all, he had long since known that Ruby had become his younger brother's subordinate. How could he possibly listen to him so easily? Moreover, he had long since been prepared. With a casual toss, he tossed a book made of metal toward Devitt. Devitt reached out to take it and read its contents. These books made of special alloy were the king's secret decrees. Each of them was engraved with unique ciphertexts, codes, and markings. They were secret documents that were secretly recorded in the archives of the various regions. It could be said that there was only one secret decree from each king, and each one was unique. Once the orders were written on it, it would not be used again after being used once. Moreover, just the alloy material and format of the king's secret decrees were already national secrets. If someone were to impersonate the king's secret decrees, it would still be possible to deceive the lower-level officials. However, when it came to the officials at the district and region levels, it would be easily exposed. Devitt scanned through the contents and was already certain that this order was most likely real. Moreover, with the first prince's status, there was no need for him to impersonate a document. However, with this, Devitt felt even more gloomy. Lifting his head to look at the smiling first prince, Devitt could not help but think, "Your Majesty, what on earth are you thinking? If this order were to be passed down, I'm afraid." However, the king's orders were the king's orders. No matter how unwilling Devitt was, under the gazes of so many people, he could not possibly defy it. Therefore, he cupped his hands and said, "How does your Highness plan to guide the arrangements for the regional selection?" "There's no need for guidance." The first prince sat in the sky, the black fog forming a black throne, making him appear even more domineering and ferocious. He was like the king of Hades who was sitting in hell. He said each word clearly. "The 4 seniors here are the pillars of the Great Western region. Of course, I have no objections to the regional selection that you've planned. However, it's just like what I've said before. The world is currently in a precarious situation, and the country needs to strengthen itself. We need more and more powerful conferred knights. Therefore, I've specially come to select knights with outstanding performances in the regional selection to be sent to the National Royal Academy to study. You guys must cherish this opportunity. Not everyone is able to skip the Regional Royal Academy and enter the Central Region directly. Such a heaven-sent opportunity has only appeared once or twice since the founding of the country." Governor Devitt laughed coldly in his heart. Such a method of substituting someone else's power was too obvious. Although it was said that the first prince would be able to enter the National Royal Academy directly, wouldn't his status, organization, and daily arrangements all be decided by the first prince? On the surface, it would belong to the National Royal Academy, but in reality, it would all become the first prince's personal power. Thinking of this, Devitt tried to stall for time. He said, "Since that's the case, Your Highness, please wait for one more day. You can continue with the arena battles after I'm gone." The first prince interrupted Devitt's words in a domineering manner and gave an order. "In any case, I'm not choosing talents based on their final results. I'll bring them away first, and you can continue with the competition." Governor Devitt also knew that this was not the time to back down. He straightened his body and said, "Your Highness, the regional selection is a rule that has been set since the founding of the country. For the past 200 years, even when the Sand Country had advanced east and the 3 countries in the north declared war, it has not been stopped. Does Your Highness wish to be the first?" You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.